The Price of Her Face. A dark romance novel. Prologue. The Auction That Wasn't. Serena Calloway. The room smelled like diesel and rust. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the cold, though it was February in South Boston, and the warehouse had no heat. Not the two men in dark coats stationed by the door, their faces professionally blank. Not even the plastic chair they'd set out for me, the kind you'd find stacked behind a church fellowship hall, completely absurd against the concrete floor. The smell. Diesel and rust and something underneath it, something old and organic, like blood that had been cleaned but never quite erased. I sat in the chair because there was nothing else to do. My hands were unbound. My phone was gone. Taken at the door, politely, the way a coat-check girl might take your jacket. For your security, Miss Calloway. As if anything about this was for my security. The fluorescent light above me buzzed. One of the tubes was dying, flickering in an arrhythmic pulse that made the shadows jump. I counted the flickers because counting gave me something to hold on to. 14, 15, 16. On 17, the door opened. Victor Kovac was shorter than I'd imagined. Every story I'd heard about him, whispered between my father's gambling associates, muttered at kitchen tables after too much Jameson, painted him as a giant. A monster. The kind of man who filled doorways and silenced rooms just by existing. In reality, he was maybe 5'8", with thinning brown hair combed carefully across a scalp that shone under the fluorescent light. He wore a navy suit, well cut, and a tie with a subtle pattern I couldn't quite make out in the flickering half-dark. His shoes were polished. His smile was warm. That was the worst part. The warmth. Men who look like monsters, you can prepare for. Men who look like your uncle at Thanksgiving, who pull out your chair and ask about your day. Those are the ones who destroy you while you're still trying to figure out if they're dangerous. Serena. He said my name like we were old friends. Thank you for coming. As if I'd had a choice. As if the two men who'd appeared at my apartment at 4 a.m, who'd knocked with a patience that was somehow more terrifying than violence, who'd said, "Mr. Kovac requests your presence," like they were delivering a dinner invitation, as if any of that had been optional. "I don't understand why I'm here," I said. A lie. I understood perfectly. My father had been dead for 11 days. Heart attack. Massive. Sudden. The kind that drops you mid-sentence. He'd been at the Kovac Run card room on West Broadway, 3 whiskeys deep, holding a hand he couldn't afford to play. The dealer said he'd laughed at something, reached for his chips, and then just stopped. Stopped laughing. Stopped breathing. Stopped being my father. The funeral was small. His gambling friends didn't come, too afraid of being seen, of the debt clinging to his name like a contagion. My mother had left us when I was 9, vanished to somewhere warm with a man who sold insurance, and she hadn't come back for the burial. It was just me and Father Brennan and the November rain, standing over a casket I'd paid for with the last $400 in my checking account. $400 for a casket. $1.8 million for the debts he left behind. The number was so large it felt fictional. Like something from a news article about someone else's tragedy. But the men who came to my apartment 3 days after the funeral, different men, not Kovacs, just creditors with dead eyes and laminated spreadsheets. They made it very real. "Your father borrowed extensively from several of my associates," Kovac said, settling into a chair across from me that someone had brought in, a real chair, leather, the kind that belonged in an office. He was a talented man, charismatic. Everyone liked Declan Calloway. "He was an addict," I said flatly. Kovac tilted his head, amused. "That too, but an addict, with excellent taste. He always found the highest stakes table, always believed the next hand would save him." He crossed his legs, adjusting the crease in his trousers. "Unfortunately, it never did, and now his debts are mine." "Are yours," he confirmed. 1,800,000, give or take. "I don't have that kind of money. I don't have any money." "I know." He said it gently, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. You work part-time at a conservation lab in Cambridge. You were completing a master's in art restoration at Boston University before you dropped to part-time enrollment last semester. Financial difficulties, I assume. My skin crawled. He'd researched me. Of course he had. You live alone, he continued. Studio apartment on Dorchester Avenue. No boyfriend. No savings to speak of. Your mother sends a check for $200 every Christmas, which you cash but never acknowledge. Every word was a door closing. Every fact, a wall rising around me. What do you want? I asked. Kovac smiled that warm, terrible smile. I want to help you, Serena. Here's the thing they don't tell you about being sold. They don't use the word. Nobody says sold or bought or traded. Nobody mentions ownership or property or the specific, ancient violence of one human being transferred to another like livestock. They use words like arrangement and resolution and opportunity. They talk about debt restructuring and asset transfer and mutually beneficial outcomes. They make it sound like finance, because that's what it is in the end, just finance. Just numbers moving from one column to another, and somewhere in the middle of those numbers, a woman's life gets folded up and filed away. Kovac explained it calmly, the way someone might explain the terms of a car lease. Option 1, I could work off the debt. He had business interests that required female employees. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The implication crawled across my skin like ice. Option 2, I could be transferred to settle a separate obligation. Another family, he didn't name them, owed Kovac a territorial concession. They'd offered something in return, but Kovac wanted more. And a woman, specifically a woman who met certain criteria, would sweeten the deal. Certain criteria, I repeated, my voice hollow. You're educated. Presentable. You speak well. He paused. And you have a particular look that my associate finds compelling. The word compelling made my stomach turn. You'd live in his household, Kovac continued. All debts would be dissolved immediately. You'd be comfortable, protected, provided for. For how long? Until he decides otherwise. The fluorescent light flickered. 17, 18, 19. And if I refuse both options? Kovac's smile didn't waver. Then the debt collectors will visit you again, less politely this time. Your apartment, your workplace, your university, they'll make sure everyone knows. And eventually, when the conventional methods are exhausted, someone will come to collect in other ways. He brushed an invisible speck from his sleeve. I'd prefer not to let it reach that point. I liked your father, Serena. I'd like to see his daughter taken care of. Taken care of. Like a problem. Like a debt. Like a thing. Who is he? I asked. The man who wants me. Wants is a strong word. Kovac stood, buttoning his jacket. He's a businessman, influential, private. He saw you once, at a distance, and requested an introduction. The debt situation simply made the timing convenient. Saw me once, at a distance. The words settled in my chest like stones. What's his name? That's not something I'm authorized to share, not yet, not until you've agreed. You want me to agree to marry a stranger without knowing who he is. I want you to agree to survive, Kovac said simply. The alternative is considerably less pleasant. He moved toward the door, gesturing to one of his men, who produced a leather folder and set it on a metal table I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a contract. Single page, clean, almost elegant in its simplicity. I read it 3 times, the words blurred and sharpened, like the dying fluorescent above me. Transfer of custodial responsibility, dissolution of all debts held under Declan Calloway's estate, residential relocation, living expenses provided, duration, indefinite. Indefinite. Not a year, not 5 years. Not until some milestone was reached or some condition was met. Indefinite. The rest of my life folded into a single word. "There's one more thing," Kovac said from the doorway. "A condition. From him, not from me." I looked up from the contract. "He wants to speak with you before you sign, not in person, by phone. He's particular about that." Kovac nodded to his man, who produced a phone. Not mine, a different one, matte black, no case, and set it on the table beside the contract. It was already connected to a call, the timer ticking. 047, 048, 049. Someone had been listening. The whole time. I picked up the phone with numb fingers and pressed it to my ear. Silence on the other end. Not empty silence. Occupied silence. The kind that comes from someone listening so intently you can feel the weight of their attention through the signal. "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted. I hated it. 3 seconds of nothing. Then a voice. Low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't rise to make a point because it didn't need to. Each word placed with the precision of someone who understood that language was a weapon, and he never wasted ammunition. Serena Calloway. Not a question. A confirmation, as if he'd been waiting to say my name out loud and was testing how it felt in his mouth. "Yes," I said. Another pause, measured, deliberate. "I have one condition," he said, "before you sign." "What condition?" "You don't get touched. By anyone. That's non-negotiable. Not Kovac. Not his men. Not anyone in my organization. No one lays a hand on you. Ever." The words were hard, absolute, delivered with a violence that had nothing to do with volume. I didn't understand. He was buying me, or whatever sanitized word they were using for it, and his first and only condition was that no one would touch me? "Including you?" I asked. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. "Especially me," he said. Then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time after the call ended. The phone screen had gone black. The contract waited. Kovac's man stood by the door, patient and indifferent, a pen ready in his breast pocket. The fluorescent light buzzed, flickered, buzzed again. Especially me. What kind of man buys a woman and then forbids himself from touching her? What kind of man says those words with that voice, rough, strained, almost wounded, like the condition wasn't a rule but a penance? I didn't know. I didn't know his name, his face, his reasons. All I knew was the alternative. Kovac's option 1, the kind of work that stripped away everything you were until there was nothing left but a body performing functions. The debt collectors. My apartment, my lab, my school, every small thing I'd built in the rubble of my father's failures, dismantled piece by piece. Or this. An unnamed man, a house I'd never seen, a life I couldn't imagine, and a promise that no one would touch me, including him. I reached for the pen. My hand was steady. That surprised me. I'd expected trembling, tears, some visible evidence of the violence being done to my autonomy. But my fingers were calm, controlled, as if my body had decided that since my mind couldn't process this, it would simply bypass the crisis entirely and go straight to functionality. I signed Serena Elise Calloway. The letters looked wrong on the expensive paper, too ordinary, too human, like a child's name written on an execution order. Kovac's man collected the contract, slid it into the leather folder, and gestured toward the door. "A car is waiting, Miss Calloway. Your belongings will be collected from your apartment and delivered tomorrow." I stood. My legs held. Another small mercy. I walked toward the door, past the guards, through the warehouse that smelled like diesel and rust and old blood. Outside, the February air hit me like a wall. Sharp, clean, punishing. Dawn was breaking over Southie, turning the sky the color of a bruise. Purple and gray, and the thinnest line of gold along the horizon, like the city was offering a beauty it knew I couldn't appreciate. A black car idled at the curb. Not a limousine. something understated. Expensive in the way things are expensive when the owner doesn't need you to notice. The driver opened the rear door without a word. I got in. The leather interior was warm, heated. After the warehouse cold, it felt almost painful, like being thawed after a long freeze. Blood rushing back into places that had gone numb, and with it, sensation. Feeling. The full, crushing weight of what I'd just done. I'd sold myself. No, that wasn't right. I'd been sold. By circumstance. By debt. By a father who'd loved poker more than he'd loved me. The distinction mattered. Or maybe it didn't. The car pulled away from the curb, and I caught my reflection in the window, distorted by the tinted glass, half-transparent, more ghost than girl. Dark hair falling past my shoulders, pale skin gone paler, eyes that looked too large for my face the way eyes do when everything else has been stripped away. I didn't recognize myself. The woman in the glass was someone I hadn't met yet, someone who belonged to a stranger, someone whose name was still Serena Calloway, but whose life was no longer her own. The driver didn't speak. The city slid past Dorchester, then the expressway, then north, away from everything I knew. The sun climbed higher, indifferent, and I watched South Boston shrink in the side mirror until it was just a smudge of brick and gray and memory. Somewhere behind me, in a warehouse that smelled like diesel and endings, a contract with my name on it was being photographed, filed, and sent to a man who had bought me without meeting me. A man whose voice sounded like something breaking. A man who had forbidden anyone, including himself, from touching me. Especially me. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I was past everything. Past fear, past anger, past the particular humiliation of being assigned a price and finding out it was exactly $1,800,000. I was somewhere beyond all of it now, somewhere empty and clean and terrifyingly still, like the moment between a wave pulling back and the ocean rushing in. And in that stillness, I made myself a promise. Whoever this man was, this stranger who'd bought me for reasons I didn't understand, who'd set a condition that made no sense, who'd said my name on the phone like it cost him something, I would not be his ghost. I would not be his object. I would not be quiet or grateful or whatever version of compliant he expected. My father had spent his life as a hostage to his own weakness. My mother had spent hers running from anything that demanded courage. I would not inherit their cowardice. Not today, not ever. They could take my freedom. They could take my name. But I would claw my way back to myself if it killed me. The car turned onto a coastal road, and through the window, I saw the ocean for the first time in months. Vast, dark, relentless. It didn't care about contracts or debts or the small tragedies of small people. It just moved, on and on and on. I opened my eyes, and I let the wave come. Chapter 1. The House of Silence. Serena Calloway. The house stood on a cliff like it was daring the ocean to take it. That was my first thought as the car crested the hill and the estate came into view. Not beautiful, not impressive, but defiant. 3 stories of gray stone and dark slate, perched on a promontory north of Boston, where the Atlantic threw itself against the rocks with mindless, relentless fury. The kind of house that didn't invite you in. The kind that tolerated your presence and waited for you to leave. The driver, a man who'd introduced himself as Brennan, first name apparently irrelevant, pulled through an iron gate that opened without him pressing anything. Cameras, I assumed. Someone was watching. Someone was always watching. The driveway curved through an acre of landscaped grounds that looked more like a cemetery than a garden. Everything pruned into sharp angles, every hedge militarily precise, not a single flower anywhere. In February, the dormant grass was the color of old bone, the trees were bare. The wind off the ocean bent them all in the same direction. like they'd given up fighting and just leaned into the punishment. I understood the feeling. "We're here, Miss Calloway," Brennan said. His voice was clipped, professional, Boston Irish buried under years of careful neutrality. "Is he here?" I asked. Brennan hesitated. A fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. "Mr. Reeve is not currently in residence." Reeve. So that was his name. Kovac hadn't told me. The contract hadn't named him. For the entire drive, 40 minutes of silence and coastal highway, I'd been heading toward a man without a name, and now it arrived without ceremony, dropped by a driver like loose change. Reeve. I said it silently, testing the shape of it. Hard consonant, long vowel, a name that sounded like something being torn. The front door was opened by a woman I hadn't expected. Mid-50s, slim silver hair cropped close to her skull. She wore a gray dress and no jewelry except a thin gold chain that disappeared into her collar. Her face was angular, handsome, with a kind of bone structure that aged well and knew it. Her eyes were dark brown, sharp, and they assessed me the way a jeweler assesses a stone, looking for flaws, estimating value. "Miss Calloway, I'm Mrs. Hale. I manage the household." She didn't offer her hand, didn't smile, just stepped aside to let me in. "Your room is prepared. I'll show you." The interior of the house was exactly what the exterior promised. Beautiful, cold, and entirely devoid of warmth. Marble floors the color of smoke. Walls paneled in dark wood. A staircase that swept upward in a curve that belonged in a period film. Everywhere I looked, there was craftsmanship. Crown molding, hand-carved banisters, light fixtures that were probably antiques, but none of it felt lived in. It felt curated, like a museum exhibit titled "How the Wealthy Suffer in Silence." No photographs on the walls. I noticed that immediately. Not a single personal image anywhere. Just oil paintings. Seascapes, mostly, dark and turbulent, the kind of art that expressed violence without depicting it. Mrs. Hale led me up the staircase, through a hallway lined with closed doors, to a room at the far end of the second floor. "This is yours," she said, opening the door. The room was larger than my entire apartment in Dorchester, king-sized bed with white linens, crisp and untouched. A window seat overlooking the ocean, the glass rattling faintly with each gust of wind. A walk-in closet that was already half full. Clothes I hadn't chosen, in sizes that fit me perfectly, in colors I would never have picked for myself. Muted tones. Expensive fabrics. Nothing bright, nothing that might draw attention. Someone had decided what I should look like. The thought landed like a stone in my stomach. "The bathroom is through there." Mrs. Hale gestured to an adjoining door. "Meals are served at 7, 12:30, and 7. Mr. Reeve prefers to eat in the study when he's home, but the kitchen is available to you at all hours. The west wing and the gardens are open. The east wing is private." Private meaning locked? Private meaning Mr. Reeve's personal quarters. She met my eyes. "You're free to move through the rest of the house as you wish. There's a library on the ground floor, a conservatory, a gym in the lower level. Brennan will drive you to approved locations in the city if you give 24 hours notice." "Approved locations? For your safety?" "For my safety," I repeated, and let the irony sit between us like a third person in the room. Mrs. Hale's expression didn't change. She was good at this. The careful blankness, the refusal to acknowledge the obvious. She'd clearly been managing this household for years, and she'd learned that the best way to survive it was to see nothing, know nothing, feel nothing. "Is there anything else you need?" she asked. "A time machine, a different father, the courage to have refused." "No," I said. "Thank you." She nodded and left, pulling the door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. I stood in the center of that beautiful, empty room and listened to the wind. 3 days passed before I saw evidence of him. Not the man himself, his shadow, his residue, the proof that someone lived in this house even though it felt like a mausoleum. The first morning, I woke at 6, habit, not intention, and went downstairs to find a coffee cup in the kitchen sink, still warm. Black coffee, no sugar, a faint ring of brown, where the liquid had sat before being poured down the drain. He'd been there minutes before me, had stood in this kitchen, in the dark, drinking his coffee in silence, and then vanished before I could see his face. The second morning, same thing, warm cup, empty kitchen, the ghost of caffeine in the air. But on the second day, there was something else, a book left on the kitchen counter, not placed casually, positioned, deliberate, a hardcover copy of The Art of Restoration, Techniques for the Conservation of Oil Paintings. My field. My specific, niche, nobody outside the industry would know this field. I stared at it for a full minute, trying to decide if it was a coincidence or a message. Then I picked it up and opened the cover. No inscription, no note, just the book, brand new, spine uncracked, waiting. He knew what I studied. He knew, and he'd left a gift, or a signal, or a test, without saying a word. I took the book to my room and didn't come out for the rest of the day. On the third morning, I forced myself to explore. Not out of curiosity, out of defiance. If this was my cage, I was going to know every inch of it. The library was on the ground floor, east-facing, with tall windows that caught the morning light. It was the first room in the house that felt intentional, rather than decorative. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, crammed with books that had actually been read, spines cracked, pages dog-eared, the kind of collection that accumulated over decades, not the kind purchased by the yard from a decorator. History, philosophy, architecture, a surprising amount of poetry, Rilke, Neruda, Mary Oliver, and an entire section on art, not the glossy coffee table volumes wealthy people used as furniture, but serious texts. Conservation journals, auction house catalogs, monographs on individual painters. I pulled one down. A study of Caravaggio's chiaroscuro technique, published by Yale University Press. Inside the front cover, in neat, angular handwriting. Light doesn't exist without shadow, neither does the truth. His handwriting. Had to be. I ran my finger over the words, trying to extract something from them. Personality, intention, the shape of a man I'd never seen. The script was precise, almost architectural. No wasted strokes. Every letter calculated, like his voice on the phone. Controlled, nothing accidental. I spent the afternoon in the library pulling books from shelves, looking for more marginalia. He'd written in several of them. Brief notes, always in the same angular hand. Never emotional, never personal. Just observations, like a man who processed the world through analysis rather than feeling. But in a volume of Mary Oliver's collected poems, I found something different. A photograph. It was tucked between the pages of The Summer Day, pressed flat like a dried flower. Small, wallet-sized, with the faded quality of something printed years ago and handled often. A woman. She was laughing, head tilted back, dark hair spilling over her shoulders, one hand raised as if waving off the camera. She was beautiful in an unconstructed way, the kind of beauty that came from movement and expression rather than symmetry. Her features were sharp, high cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, eyes that even in a photograph looked like they were daring you to look away. My heart stopped. Then restarted, harder, faster, because the woman in the photograph looked like me. Not exactly, not twins, but the resemblance was devastating. The same dark hair, the same sharp angles, the same pale skin against dark clothes. If you saw us across a room, in dim light, you might not be able to tell us apart. Up close, the differences would emerge. Her nose was narrower, my mouth was wider, her brows had a different arch, but the overall impression, the silhouette, the feeling of her, it was me. Or I was her, or neither, and the resemblance was a coincidence, and I was seeing ghosts in photographs because this house was making me paranoid. But I knew it wasn't coincidence. Because Kovac had said it, you have a particular look that my associate finds compelling. Compelling. Not attractive, not beautiful. Compelling. Because I looked like her. Whoever she was. I slid the photograph back between the pages and closed the book with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up and the house groaned with it, old bones protesting the cold, timbers shifting, windows rattling in their frames. The ocean was louder here than anywhere I'd ever lived, a constant low roar that should have been soothing but felt instead like a warning. Something vast and dark pressing against the walls. I lay in the oversized bed, the white sheets pulled to my chin, and stared at the ceiling. At 2:14 a.m., I gave up. I pulled on a sweater over my pajamas and went downstairs. The house was different at night, all shadows and strange angles, the marble floors gleaming faintly in the moonlight that filtered through the tall windows. My bare feet made no sound. I was a ghost haunting a ghost's house. The kitchen was dark. I was reaching for the light switch when I sensed it, a presence, someone else in the room, a shift in the air, a warmth that didn't belong to the house. I froze, and then, from the shadows near the window, a voice. "You should be sleeping." Low, controlled. The same voice from the phone, but closer now, stripped of the electronic distance, rougher, more human. I didn't move, couldn't. My hand was still raised toward the light switch, suspended in air, and my heart was hammering so hard I was certain he could hear it. "So should you," I said. A pause. Then something that might have been a laugh, if it hadn't died before it reached full volume. "I don't sleep much." "Neither do I. Not here." Another pause. Longer. I could hear him breathing, slow, measured, the kind of breathing that came from years of controlling every physical response, every tell, every weakness. "Turn on the light," he said quietly, "if you want." I did. My fingers found the switch, and the kitchen flooded with warm light. And there he was. Callum Reeve stood by the window, leaning against the counter, a glass of water in his hand. He was tall, taller than I'd imagined from his voice, 6'2" or 6'3", with the kind of build that suggested discipline rather than vanity. Broad shoulders, lean waist, arms that strained against the sleeves of a plain gray t-shirt. His hair was dark blonde, cut short on the sides, slightly longer on top, and it looked like he'd been running his hands through it. His jaw was sharp, shadowed with 2 days of stubble. But it was his eyes that undid me. Pale blue. So light they were almost colorless, like ice that had been scraped thin enough to see through. They held no warmth, no invitation, just a flat, clear intensity that pinned me in place the way a collector's pin holds a butterfly to velvet. He was looking at me. And something in his expression, something beneath the control, beneath the blankness, cracked. Just for a second. His lips parted. His hand tightened on the glass. And his eyes, those pale, impossible eyes, went wide with something I recognized because I'd felt it myself, minutes ago, standing in front of a photograph. Recognition. Not of me. Of someone else. He said a name. Not mine. Margot. The word left his mouth like it had been pulled out of him by force. Hoarse, involuntary, the sound a man makes when he's been punched in a wound he thought had healed. Then he caught himself. The crack sealed over, the mask slid back into place. He straightened, set the glass down on the counter, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady, professional, empty. "Serena, sorry." 2 words. And they told me everything. The photograph, the resemblance, the reason I was standing in this kitchen, in this house, on this cliff at the edge of the world. He hadn't bought me for business. He hadn't bought me for status or convenience or any of the sanitized reasons Kovac had offered. He'd bought me because I had a dead woman's face. "Who is Margot?" I asked. His jaw clenched. A muscle ticked beneath the stubble. He picked up the glass again, drank, set it down. A sequence of small, controlled movements that existed only to buy time. "No one," he said. "You called me by her name. She's not no one." His eyes met mine, and I felt the impact of it. A physical thing, like a hand pressed against my sternum. There was so much locked behind those eyes, so much weight. He looked at me the way someone might look at a fire they'd started and couldn't put out, fascinated, horrified, unable to turn away. "Go to bed, Serena," he said. "I want an answer. You want a lot of things. So do I. We don't always get them." He pushed off the counter and moved toward the doorway, toward the east wing, toward the part of the house where I wasn't allowed. As he passed me, close enough that I caught his scent, soap and something darker, wood smoke or whiskey, he paused. Didn't look at me. Couldn't, maybe. "The book on the counter," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Did you read it?" "Yes." A beat. "2. "Good," he said. And then he was gone, swallowed by the dark hallway, his footsteps fading into the bones of the house until the only sound left was the wind and the ocean and my own ragged breathing. I stood in the bright kitchen, barefoot on the cold marble, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. He'd looked at me like I was a wound, like seeing my face caused him physical pain. And then he'd ask about a book about restoration, about taking something damaged and bringing it back. I went back to my room. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat on the window seat and watched the ocean throw itself against the rocks, over and over, relentless and pointless and beautiful in its violence. The moon was nearly full, and its light turned the water into hammered silver. "Margot." I whispered the name to the glass, watching my breath fog the window. Somewhere in this house a man was awake too, a man who had bought me because my face was a mirror of someone he'd lost, who kept me close enough to torment himself and far enough to survive it, who left books on countertops like letters he couldn't send and forbade himself from touching me as if proximity alone might kill him, especially me. Now I understood. The condition wasn't about protecting me. It was about protecting him. From wanting something he believed he didn't deserve. From reaching out and finding not the woman he loved, but a stranger wearing her face. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and made myself a second promise. The first, in the car, I would not be his ghost. The second now, in this room that was mine but wasn't, in this life that was mine but wasn't. I would find out who Margot was. I would find out what he'd done. And I would make him see me, Serena, not the ghost, not the reflection, not the convenient substitute, or I would burn this house down trying. The ocean roared. The wind screamed. And somewhere in the east wing, behind a door I wasn't allowed to open, a man who couldn't look at me without seeing someone else was fighting the same sleepless war. I could feel it. The way you feel a storm before it breaks. Something was coming. Something neither of us was ready for. Chapter 2. The Ghost in the Frame. Callum Reeve. I called her by a dead woman's name. Standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, at 2 a.m, with a glass of water going warm in my hand, I looked at Serena Calloway and said Margot. Like Margot was a reflex. Like 7 years of silence could be undone by a woman in a sweater, standing barefoot on my kitchen floor with her dark hair loose and her eyes too sharp and her face. Christ, her face! I sit in my office now, 3 hours later, the door locked, the lights off. The ocean is a black wall beyond the windows, indistinguishable from the sky, no moon left. Just dark, piled on dark, and somewhere in it the sound of water destroying rock, which is the only honest sound in this house. My hands are steady, they're always steady. I've held a gun to a man's temple without a tremor. I've signed contracts worth 8 figures, while the person across the table was being informed, via earpiece, that their family was no longer safe. Control is not something I practice, it's something I am. The way some men are tall or left-handed, I am controlled. Except when I look at her. Except when I turn a corner and my nervous system fires before my brain can catch up, and for one searing, annihilating second, I believe Margot is alive. She's not. I know she's not. I identified the body. 7 years. 7 years, since the morning, that split my life into before and after. I don't let myself revisit it often. The memory is a room I keep locked, the same way I keep the east wing locked. Not because what's inside is dangerous, but because if I open the door, I might not come back out. But tonight, after seeing Serena's face in the kitchen light, the lock has broken, and I'm inside the room. We'd argued that morning, a stupid fight. The kind that means nothing and everything. Margot wanted to visit her sister in Maine for the weekend. I didn't want her to go. Not because I was controlling, though I was, in ways I didn't understand yet, but because I had intel that the Volkov family was making moves. Probing our territory. Testing for weaknesses. Margot was my weakness. Everyone knew it. My enemies knew it. My own people knew it. Lachlan had pulled me aside 3 months earlier and said, "Voice careful. Eyes careful. Brother, you need to be less obvious. The way you look at her? People see that. People use that." I'd told him to mind his own business. Because I was 27 and arrogant and in love for the first and only time in my life, and I believed, with the absolute certainty of a man who has never been truly hurt, that I could protect her. That morning, she'd been standing in the kitchen. This kitchen, the same counter, the same window, packing a bag for the trip. Her dark hair was braided. She was wearing a white blouse and jeans, and she was furious with me. "You can't keep me locked in this house, Callum." "I'm not locking you anywhere. I'm asking you to wait 1 week." "You're always asking me to wait. 1 week becomes 2, 2 becomes a month. I haven't left this property in 3 weeks. It's not safe. It's never safe. That's the life you chose. But I didn't choose to be a prisoner in it." She looked at me then, really looked, and I'd seen the exhaustion in her eyes. Not physical, existential. The weariness of a woman who loved a dangerous man and was tired of paying the price for his choices. "I'm going," she said, "today. I'll take your car since mine has that engine light on. I'll be back Sunday." "Margot." "Don't." She held up a hand. "Don't ask me to stay. Not today." I should have asked anyway. I should have gotten on my knees and begged. Instead, I'd kissed her, hard, angry, the kind of kiss that substitutes for words when you're too proud to say them, and walked out. I had a meeting downtown. Something about distribution routes, territory lines, the mechanics of an empire I was still learning to run after my father's murder 2 years prior. Important, I'd told myself. Urgent. Nothing was urgent. Nothing was ever urgent compared to her. But I didn't know that yet. The call came at 11:47 a.m. Lachlan's voice, stripped of everything. No warmth, no humor, just words delivered like bullets. "Callum, there's been an explosion. Your car." I didn't understand. My car was in the garage. I'd taken Lachlan's sedan to the meeting because Margot had taken mine. The rest is fragments. The drive to the hospital. Lachlan's hand on my arm, gripping too tight. The smell of the corridor. Antiseptic and something underneath. Metallic and wrong. A doctor whose face I never memorized, speaking words I couldn't assemble into meaning. Incendiary device, attached to the chassis. Detonated when the engine reached operating temperature, approximately 4 miles from the estate. She hadn't even made it to the highway. The bomb was meant for me. The Volkovs had placed it on my car, the car I always drove, the car she never used, except that morning, that one morning. Because her car had an engine light on, and she was angry, and I'd let her walk out the door without saying I love you, without checking the goddamn vehicle, without doing the one thing I'd sworn to do since the day I first touched her. Keep her safe. They let me see her. I shouldn't have looked. Lachlan tried to stop me. The doctor said it wasn't advisable. I looked. She was covered by a white sheet, what was left of her. The blast had been concentrated on the driver's side. Her left hand, the one she'd been waving at me that morning, the one that wore the ring I'd given her 3 months earlier when I'd asked her to marry me. They never found the ring. I pulled back the sheet and looked at her face. It was intact, mostly, unmarked on the right side, almost peaceful, as if she'd simply fallen asleep in a terrible place. But the left side, I don't describe that, not even to myself. Some images exist in a part of my brain that operates independently, surfacing only in dreams, and I've learned to let them pass through without holding on. The way you let a wave wash over you without fighting. You go under. You come back up. You keep breathing. I kissed her forehead, the right side, the side that was still her, and I whispered the last thing I would ever say to Margot Ellison. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. 3 times, like a prayer, like if I said it enough, it might undo itself. Might rewind the morning and give me back the chance to get on my knees and beg her to stay. It didn't. Prayers never do. After that, I became something else. The Volkovs were dismantled within 6 months. I won't detail how. The methods were not something I discuss, even with Lachlan, who participated in most of them and carries his own scars. What matters is that every person involved in placing that device, every person who ordered it, funded it, or knew about it and said nothing, every one of them answered for it. And when it was done, when the last account had been settled and the last debt collected, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. He had my face, my hands. But whatever had lived inside me, whatever part of me was capable of laughter, of tenderness, of the specific foolishness required to love another person, that was gone. Removed, cut out with the same surgical precision I'd applied to the Volkov network. I became the ghost. The name wasn't my choice. It was given to me by rivals, by allies, by the men who sat across negotiation tables and found themselves facing a man who showed nothing, felt nothing, wanted nothing. For 7 years it was enough. I built the Reeves Syndicate into something my father would have recognized but not understood. Shipping, real estate, imports, legitimate fronts over darker operations, all of it running with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had replaced his heart with a ledger. I didn't date, didn't touch, didn't allow myself the small human indulgences, a meal shared, a hand held, a body warm beside mine in the dark, that would remind me I was still capable of wanting. Because wanting was the door. And behind the door was Margot, dead on a steel table, and the sound I'd made when I saw her. Not a scream, not a cry, something lower and worse, something animal. I would never make that sound again. I would never give anyone that power over me. That was the promise. That was the wall. 7 years, and it held. Then I saw her. Not Margot. Serena. It was 3 months ago. A meeting with Kovac about territory lines. Routine, tedious. The kind of negotiation that involved more posturing than substance. Kovac had invited me to his warehouse in Southie, which he used as an informal office, because he believed it made him look powerful. It made him look like a man who couldn't afford a real office, but I kept that to myself. I arrived early, stood in the corridor outside the meeting room, reviewing documents on my phone, waiting for Kovac's people to finish their preparations. And a woman walked past me. She didn't notice me. She was carrying a box of files, her hair pulled back, her expression focused and slightly annoyed. She wore a plain black skirt and a white blouse, some kind of work uniform, and she moved with the purposeful efficiency of someone who had too much to do and not enough time. She turned a corner, and I stopped breathing. Because in the half-second before she disappeared from view, she'd glanced over her shoulder, just a quick check, the way you do when you feel someone watching, and her face had caught the light. And it was her. Margot. Not exactly, not a twin, but the resemblance was so violent, so immediate, that my body responded before my mind could intervene. My pulse spiked. My vision narrowed. My hand reached out for a wall that wasn't there, and I nearly fell. Lachlan caught my arm. Callum, what? Who was that? My voice didn't sound like mine. Thin. Scraped. Who was? The woman, just now, with the files. Lachlan looked down the empty corridor, then back at me. I saw concern in his eyes. Alarm, even. I didn't see anyone, Cal. I pushed past him and walked the corridor, checked every door. She was gone. But I found out who she was within the hour. Serena Elise Calloway, 25, daughter of Declan Calloway, one of Kovac's gambling associates. She'd been doing filing work at the warehouse, part-time, under the table, to supplement her income while she studied art restoration. Art restoration. Margot had been a painter. The coincidence was so precise it felt like cruelty. Like the universe had constructed a replacement specifically designed to destroy me. I told myself to let it go. Forgot about her for a day, 2 days, a week. But the image wouldn't leave. That half-second glance, the fall of dark hair, the angle of her jaw. It lived behind my eyelids, waiting for me every time I closed my eyes. I had Nina pull a full background, education, finances, family, medical records. I read the file 3 times, at night in my office, feeling like a man doing something criminal, which, I suppose, I was. And then her father died. And the debts surfaced. And Kovac began making arrangements. I should have done nothing. Should have let Kovac handle his own affairs, let Serena Calloway disappear into whatever fate her father's failures had created for her. It wasn't my business. She wasn't my concern. But I kept seeing her face. Margot's face. And I knew what Kovac would do with a woman like that. A woman with no protector, no resources, no way to fight back. He'd use her, consume her. Turn her into one of the hollow-eyed women who drifted through his operations like ghosts, present, but no longer alive in any way that mattered. I couldn't let that happen. Not to that face. So I made Kovac an offer. The territorial concession he'd been pushing for, a section of the harbor I didn't need, in exchange for the girl, all debts dissolved. She'd come to me instead. Kovac had laughed. The ghost wants a woman? Since when? Since now. Do we have a deal or not? We did. And I spent the next 3 months telling myself it was mercy, that I was saving her from a worse fate, that my motives were clean. They weren't. I know that now. I bought her because I'm obsessed with a dead woman, and Serena Calloway has her face, and some sick, broken part of me believed that keeping her close would be enough. That I could look at her from a distance, through hallways, across kitchens, in the margins of this empty house, and feel something other than the void. That I could have the shadow without reaching for the substance. I was wrong. Because she stood in my kitchen tonight, barefoot, hair wild, eyes blazing, and she asked me who Margot was. And the way she said it, not timid, not afraid, but demanding, like she had a right to know. That wasn't Margot. Margot would never have demanded anything. She was soft where Serena is sharp. She bent where Serena pushes back. She accepted the cage I built around her with quiet grace, and it killed her. Serena would burn the cage down, and that terrifies me more than the resemblance ever could. Nina arrives at 7. I hear her heels on the marble, precise, unhurried, the walk of a woman who has managed a criminal empire's legal affairs for 15 years and hasn't been surprised by anything since the Clinton administration. She finds me in the office, doesn't comment on the dark, on the untouched glass of whiskey, on the fact that I clearly haven't slept. She's awake, Nina says, setting a file on my desk. She was in the library most of yesterday, found the Caravaggio book, and the photograph. My jaw clenches. How do you know? The cameras, Callum, which you insisted on installing. She sits across from me, crosses her legs. She studied it for approximately 4 minutes. Then she put it back and went to her room, didn't come out until 2 a.m. I know, I was there. I know you were there, the cameras, Callum. Her tone is patient but pointed. You called her by the wrong name. I say nothing. This is exactly what I warned you about, Nina continues. You brought a woman into this house who looks like your dead fiancé? And you're surprised that it's destroying you? This was never going to work. You can't keep her here like a living memorial. That's not what she is. Then what is she? I don't answer, because the truth is worse than what Nina's suggesting. Serena isn't a memorial. She's a test. Every time I look at her, I'm tested. Can I see the living woman instead of the dead one? Can I hear Serena's voice without hearing Margot's? Can I exist in the same room with that face and not reach for her? So far, the answer is no. But I keep trying. Because the alternative, sending her away, returning her to Kovac, admitting I can't handle what I've done, means admitting that Margot's death has beaten me. And I refuse to be beaten, even by grief, even by this. She asked me who Margot was. I say. Nina goes still. What did you tell her? Nothing. Good. Keep it that way. For how long? Forever, ideally. The less she knows about your past, the safer she is. She'll figure it out. She's smart. Then redirect her. Give her something to do. Let her feel useful. But don't give her the truth, Callum. The truth will make her either pity you or hate you, and neither of those is productive. Nina stands, smooths her jacket. One more thing. Kovac's people have been making noise about the harbor concession. They think you gave up too much for a woman you're not even sleeping with. There are questions. Let them question. Questions become rumors. Rumors become vulnerabilities. If word gets out that the great Callum Reeve is pining for a dead woman's double, enough. Nina holds my gaze for a moment, then nods. As you wish. She pauses at the door. But Callum, she cut the photograph loose from the book and put it back. She didn't take it. She didn't confront Mrs. Hale. She came to you, directly, at 2 a.m. Your point? My point is that she's not afraid of you. And a woman who isn't afraid of the man who bought her is either very stupid or very dangerous. She tilts her head. She didn't strike me as stupid. Nina leaves. I sit in the dark, staring at nothing, and think about Serena standing in my kitchen with her jaw set and her eyes burning. Who is Margot? Not who was she. Who is she? Present tense. As if Margot still existed, somewhere, waiting to be defined. And maybe she does. Maybe she exists in the space between us, between me and Serena. A ghost neither of us can see, but both of us can feel. The invisible third person in every room, every silence, every moment I look at Serena's face and see 2 women at once. I lean back in my chair and close my eyes. Behind my eyelids, Margot laughing in the kitchen, braid swinging. Behind my eyelids, Serena, barefoot on cold marble, demanding answers. 2 women, 1 face. And me, caught between them like a man standing in a doorway, unable to step forward or back. I open my eyes. Dawn is breaking over the ocean, gray light, reluctant, as if the sun isn't sure the world deserves illumination today. I stand, pour the whiskey down the sink, make coffee. And before I leave for the office, before I disappear into the mechanical comfort of work, of numbers, of problems that can be solved with money or force, I do the thing I've done every morning since she arrived. I leave something for her. Today it's a sketchbook, Italian-made, thick cream pages, the kind used by conservators for preliminary drawings. I place it on the kitchen counter beside a set of graphite pencils. Faber-Castell, the brand she used at the university lab, because I checked. Because I check everything. Because knowing what she needs is the only form of closeness I allow myself. I don't leave a note. Notes would require words, and words would require honesty, and honesty would crack me open. So I leave the sketchbook and the pencils, and I walk out the door, and I tell myself that this is enough, that gifts without names, and proximity without touch, and silence without explanation, that these are sufficient, that I can keep this up, that I can live in the same house as a woman who wears Margot's face and speaks with Serena's voice, and never, ever reach for her. especially me. I said those words on the phone 3 days ago when she was sitting in Kovac's warehouse and I was standing in this office, listening to her breathe across a phone line. Especially me. I meant it as protection. Now I understand it was prophecy. Because the person most likely to hurt Serena Calloway isn't Kovac, or his men, or any of the dozen enemies who would use her against me if they knew what she was. It's me. Not with violence, never with violence, but with the specific cruelty of a man who looks at a living woman and sees only the dead. That is what will break her, if I let it. And that is what I cannot allow. I close the front door behind me. The February air hits my face, sharp and clean. The ocean crashes. The wind carries salt. Somewhere behind me, in a beautiful room she didn't choose, Serena is waking up. She'll find the sketchbook. She'll know it's from me. And she'll wonder, the same way I wonder, every moment, every hour, every time I stand outside her door at night and force myself not to knock. What does this man want from me? The answer is simple. The answer is impossible. I want to look at her and see only her. Just Serena. Not the ghost. Not the mirror. Just her. I don't know if I can. But God help me, I'm going to try. Chapter 3. Cracks. Serena Calloway. I kept a catalog of the things he left me. Not because I was grateful, because I was building a case. Day 1. The Art Restoration Textbook. My exact subspecialty, a title I'd had on my Amazon wish list for 8 months. Day 3. The Sketchbook and Pencils. Faber-Castell 9000 series, the brand I used in the lab. Not a guess. Research. Day 5. A jar of Calabrian chili flakes from a shop in the North End. The same shop my father used to visit before he couldn't afford to leave Dorchester. Day 7. A first edition of John Berger's Ways of Seeing, the book that made me choose art conservation as a career, inscribed by the author, worth thousands. Day 9. Nothing. The counter was bare. I'd spent the morning strangely disappointed and hated myself for it. Day 10. A small watercolor of Boston Harbor, unsigned, clearly old. I found it leaning against the coffee machine with a humidity-controlled sleeve to protect it. A conservator's detail. He'd thought about how I'd want to store it. Every gift was precise. Every gift was personal. And not one of them came with a word. No notes. No explanations. No good morning. No how are you. No acknowledgement that we were two human beings occupying the same address. Just objects appearing on the kitchen counter like offerings left at a shrine, from a man who vanished before dawn and returned after I'd gone to bed. I saw him exactly once in the 10 days following our kitchen encounter. A Tuesday. I'd been in the library, reading, when I heard his voice in the hallway, low, clipped, speaking to someone on the phone. I'd gone to the doorway, and there he was, 20 feet away, pacing near the staircase with the phone pressed to his ear. He'd sensed me, looked up. Our eyes met. And I watched it happen again. That crack in his expression, the split second where his eyes went wide and his lips parted and something raw and desperate flared behind the mask before he could extinguish it. He turned away, walked toward the east wing, didn't look back. I stood in the library doorway, pulse hammering, and thought, he can't even look at me. Not won't. Can't. There's a difference. And it made me furious. On day 11, I decided to stop being patient. Mrs. Hale had mentioned that Callum occasionally ate dinner in the formal dining room when he had no evening meetings. I asked her, casually, over morning tea, whether tonight was one of those nights. I believe so, she'd said, with the careful neutrality of a woman who suspected she was being weaponized. Good, I'll be cooking. Her eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, the Mrs. Hale equivalent of screaming. The kitchen is, of course, available to you, she said. For two. I'll need the dining room set. She studied me for a long moment. I couldn't read her expression, but I thought I saw something shift behind her eyes. Not quite approval. Maybe recognition. the look one stubborn woman gives another. "I'll see to it," she said. I spent the afternoon cooking, not because I was trying to impress him, because cooking was the one thing I could control in a house where nothing belonged to me. Not the clothes, not the room, not the view from the window, but a pot of water boiling on a stove, garlic sizzling in olive oil, the specific alchemy of turning raw ingredients into something nourishing. That was mine. My father's recipe: spaghetti aglio e olio with the Calabrian chili flakes. Callum's own gift, turned back on him. A test. Would he recognize the ingredient? Would he understand that I'd noticed the gift, and that I was speaking back in the only language he seemed to understand? Objects instead of words. The dining room was ridiculous for 2 people. A table that could seat 14, dark mahogany, surrounded by chairs that probably had more structural integrity than my old apartment building. Mrs. Hale had set 2 places at one end: white china, crystal glasses, cloth napkins, candlelight, the works. I hadn't asked for candles. Mrs. Hale, it seemed, had her own ideas about what this dinner should be. At 7:12, I heard the front door. Footsteps in the hall, that particular rhythm I'd learned to identify, deliberate and unhurried. Then a pause. He'd smelled the food. A longer pause. He was deciding. I stood at the head of the table, hands clasped, heart pounding, and waited for him to either come in or retreat to the east wing. It was a coin flip. This man had spent 11 days avoiding a shared room with me. There was every chance he'd simply disappear. The dining room door opened. Callum stood in the doorway, still in his suit, dark charcoal, white shirt, no tie, the top button undone. He looked exhausted. Shadows under his eyes, tension in his jaw, the kind of fatigue that came not from physical work, but from the constant effort of holding yourself together. His gaze moved from me to the table, to the candles, to the pot of pasta I'd set on a trivet between our places. Then back to me. "You cooked," he said. "I did. For 2. Unless you'd prefer to eat in your office, alone, again." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite a smile. A recognition that he'd been called out, and that he probably deserved it. He sat down. I served the pasta. He watched me do it, watched my hands, the way I twisted the tongs, the steam rising from the bowl. When I set his plate in front of him, our fingers almost touched. Almost. He pulled back, just barely, and the retreat was so practiced, so instinctive, that I knew he'd been doing it for years. Pulling back, maintaining the gap, keeping the world at a distance that couldn't hurt him. We ate in silence for several minutes. The food was good. I knew it was good. My father's recipe never failed, and the chili flakes added exactly the right bite. Callum ate slowly, methodically, the way he seemed to do everything, with control, without pleasure. I couldn't stand it. "Do you ever actually taste anything?" I asked. He looked up, fork suspended. "Excuse me? You eat like you're refueling a machine? No reaction, no expression. You could be eating cardboard for all the difference it seems to make." His jaw tightened. "The food is excellent." "That's a review, not a response." I set my fork down. "I used the chili flakes, the ones you left me, day 5, from Luca's in the North End." A beat. "You noticed," he said. "I notice everything, Callum. It's all I have to do in this house." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't soften them. "You leave me gifts every morning like I'm a shrine you're maintaining, and then you disappear. You don't talk to me. You don't look at me. You've spoken exactly 4 sentences to me in 11 days, and one of them was another woman's name." The air between us went taut. He set his fork down, carefully, precisely, parallel to the edge of the plate. "What do you want me to say?" he asked. "The truth. Who is Margot? What happened to her, and why do I look like her?" Silence. The candles flickered. Outside, the ocean roared its indifferent accompaniment. "Margot Ellison," he said finally, and the name left his mouth like something being extracted. Slow, reluctant, painful. "She was my fiancée. She died 7 years ago. A car bomb meant for me." The words hit me one at a time, each one heavier than the last. Fiancé. Died. Car bomb. Meant for me. And I look like her, I said. Yes. That's why you bought me. His jaw clenched so hard I saw the muscle jump beneath his skin. It's more complicated than that. Is it? I leaned forward, and I felt something burning inside me. Not anger exactly, but something adjacent, the fury of being reduced to a resemblance. Because from where I'm sitting, it's very simple. A man lost the woman he loved. He found someone who looks like her. He bought her, and now he keeps her in a house by the ocean, and leaves her presence, and can't bear to be in the same room with her, because every time he looks at her, he sees someone who's dead. Callum's hand flattened on the table. His knuckles were white. You don't understand, he said, and his voice was low, strained, like a wire being twisted past its tolerance. Then make me understand. I can't. Won't. Can't. He pushed back from the table. Because explaining would require me to tell you things that would make you look at me differently, and He stopped, pressed his lips together. The crack was showing again, wider this time, and behind it I could see something I hadn't expected. Not coldness, not control. Shame. Callum. I said his name differently this time. Softer. Not because the anger had gone, but because beneath it, I'd found something else. I'm not her. You know that, right? He closed his eyes. Yes, he said, I know that. Then look at me, not at the resemblance, not at the ghost, at me. He opened his eyes. And for the first time, the very first time since that night in the kitchen, he looked at me without flinching. It lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds where his pale blue eyes held mine, and I saw not the ghost, not the crime lord, not the man who'd built an empire on grief, but someone drowning, someone exhausted, someone who had been holding his breath for 7 years and didn't know how to stop. Then he stood. Thank you for dinner, he said, and walked out. I sat at the table for a long time after he left. The candles burned down. The pasta went cold. Mrs. Hale appeared silently, began clearing plates. If she'd heard the conversation, and in this house everyone heard everything, she gave no sign. Mrs. Hale, I said as she stacked the dishes. Yes, Miss Calloway? Did you know her, Margot? She paused, a long, careful pause. I did, she said finally. I managed this household when she lived here. What was she like? Mrs. Hale set the plates down, folded her hands, looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Gentle, she said, kind. She painted watercolors of the ocean and left them around the house. She sang when she cooked. She loved Mr. Reeve with a devotion that frightened me, because I could see it wouldn't end well. Love like that in this world. She stopped herself. She was a good woman. And I look like her. You have her coloring, her features, in a general sense. Mrs. Hale met my eyes. But you're not like her, not at all. How so? Margot was soft, yielding. She accepted things. Mrs. Hale picked up the plates again. You don't. You push. You demand. You cooked him dinner and made him sit across from you and answer questions he's been avoiding for 7 years. She moved toward the door. Margot would never have done that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Mrs. Hale paused at the threshold. It's a necessary thing, she said. This house has been a tomb for too long. Then she was gone, and I was alone with the guttered candles and the cold food and a clarity that felt like a blade. I went to the bathroom, stood in front of the mirror, and looked at my face. Really looked. The way I hadn't since arriving at this house. Because mirrors here felt like ambushes. Every reflection a reminder that my face wasn't entirely my own. That someone else had worn these features first, and loved with them and died in them. Dark hair past my shoulders. High cheekbones. A jaw that was too sharp for conventional beauty. Eyes that people called intense when they were being kind and unsettling when they weren't. Margot's coloring. Margot's features in a general sense. But not Margot. never Margot. And as long as I wore this face unchanged, this hair, this silhouette, this approximation of a dead woman, Callum would never see me. He would look at me and see her, would stand outside my door at night and whisper to a ghost, would leave gifts on the counter for a memory, not a person. I opened the bathroom drawer. Inside, among the expensive toiletries someone had stocked for me, were a pair of scissors. Sharp, professional, the kind you'd find in a stylist's kit. Another thoughtful provision from whoever had furnished this room, Mrs. Hale, probably, or someone following Callum's instructions. I picked them up. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me again, the same unnatural calm I'd felt in Kovac's warehouse, my body bypassing crisis and going straight to action. I gathered my hair, all of it. The dark, heavy length that fell past my shoulders, that caught the light the same way Margot's had in the photograph. That was the first thing anyone saw when they looked at me in this house. And I cut. The sound was louder than I expected, a crisp, decisive shearing that echoed off the tile. 18 inches of dark hair fell to the bathroom floor, like something being shed, a skin, a costume, an identity that had never been mine. I kept cutting. Not carefully. There was nothing precise about this. I hacked and shaped and trimmed until the hair sat just above my jawline, choppy and uneven, and nothing like the smooth, long fall that Margot wore in the photograph. When I was done, I set the scissors on the counter and looked in the mirror. The woman looking back was not beautiful, not by the standards of this house. Her hair was a mess, jagged, asymmetrical, the kind of cut that would make a stylist weep. But her face was different, sharper, more defined. Without the softening curtain of long hair, every angle was exposed, the jaw, the cheekbones, the set of her mouth. She didn't look like Margot anymore. She looked like herself. She looked like Serena. I swept the hair off the floor, threw it in the trash, and went to bed. For the first time since arriving at this house, I slept through the night. The next morning, I went downstairs at 6. The coffee cup was in the sink. Still warm. He'd been here. And on the counter, today's offering, a small pot of yellow crocuses, the first color I'd seen in this entire house. Bright, defiant, absurdly cheerful against the gray marble. I was touching the petals when I heard him. Not his usual ghost departure. He was still here. Standing in the doorway to the kitchen, coat on, keys in hand, frozen mid-exit. Staring at me. I turned to face him fully, and I watched the impact land. His eyes went wide, his lips parted. His hand, the one holding the keys, dropped to his side, and I heard the metal jingle against his thigh, because the rest of the world had gone completely silent. He was looking at my hair, at the absence of it, at the face that was, for the first time, unmistakably mine. "What did you do?" he said. His voice was rough, not angry. Something else, something raw. "I made sure you'd never confuse me for her again," I said. He stared at me. 10 seconds, 20, an eternity measured in heartbeats. I watched him try to find Margot in my face and fail. Watched the old reflex fire and miss its target. Watched his brain reach for the pattern it had relied on, dark hair, soft angles, the ghost in the frame, and find instead something new, something that didn't match, something that demanded to be seen on its own terms. His throat worked. And then, so quietly, I almost didn't hear it over the sound of my own blood rushing. "I never confused you." I blinked. "What?" "I never confused you for her." He took a step into the kitchen, just one. "From the first moment you stood in this room, I knew you weren't Margot. Your voice is different. The way you hold yourself." She folded inward. "You push outward. Your eyes are angrier. Your mouth is wider. You move like someone who's been fighting her whole life, and she moved like someone who'd never had to." Each observation was a blade, precise and surgical. "Then why can't you look at me?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Because you're not her, he said. That's the problem. You're not her, and I see you anyway. I see you, and it. He stopped, turned his face away. And in that turn, in the way his jaw clenched, and his hand fisted at his side, and his entire body braced against whatever was trying to surface, I understood something that changed everything. He wasn't avoiding me because I reminded him of Margot. He was avoiding me because I didn't. Because seeing me, really seeing me, Serena, the living woman, not the echo of the dead one, felt like a betrayal, like moving on. Like admitting that 7 years of penance and grief and self-inflicted isolation hadn't killed the part of him that could want someone new. He wasn't haunted by Margot's ghost. He was haunted by his own capacity to live without her. Callum, I said. He didn't look at me. Callum, look at me. He did. And this time there was no crack. No split-second recognition of a dead woman. Just his pale eyes, raw and exposed, fixed on mine with an intensity that felt like being held. The hair looks terrible, he said. Despite everything, the grief between us, the ghost between us, the 7 years of damage and the 11 days of silence, I laughed. I know, I said. I did it with bathroom scissors at midnight. I'll have someone come to the house, a stylist, to, he gestured vaguely, fix it. Don't you dare. He almost smiled. Not quite. The muscles moved, the intention was there, but it died before it reached full expression, a reflex atrophied from years of disuse. But the attempt was there, the ghost of a smile from the ghost himself. I have to go, he said. Meeting downtown. I know. You always have a meeting downtown. He moved toward the door, paused. The crocuses, he said, without turning. They were for you, not for her. Then he was gone. And I stood in the kitchen, touching the bright yellow petals of the first flowers anyone had given me in years, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not forgiveness. He hadn't earned that yet. Not trust. That would take longer. But a door opening, just barely, in a house full of locked rooms. That afternoon, Lachlan came to visit. I'd heard about Callum's brother, but hadn't met him. Mrs. Hale announced him with the same neutral tone she used for everything. Mr. Lachlan Reeve is here, Miss Calloway, and I found him in the living room, sprawled on a couch that probably cost more than my old car, grinning like he'd just heard the best joke of his life. He was younger than Callum, maybe 30, with the same build but a completely different energy. Where Callum was controlled, Lachlan was kinetic. Where Callum was silence, Lachlan was noise. He had his brother's coloring, dark blonde hair, sharp features, but his eyes were green, not blue, and they were warm in a way Callum's never were. So you're the woman who's got my brother acting like a human being for the first time in 7 years, he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, friendly. I had to see for myself. Acting like a human being is generous, I said. He barely speaks to me. For Callum, that is human. Before you arrived, his primary form of communication was silence, and his secondary was threats. You've upgraded him to gifts and occasional eye contact. That's practically a TED Talk. Despite myself, I smiled. Lachlan noticed. There it is. You're not as angry as he thinks you are. I'm furious, I corrected, but anger and humor aren't mutually exclusive. God, I like you already. He dropped back onto the couch, gestured for me to sit. Call's gonna tell you I'm here to check on you. That's half true. I am checking on you. But I'm also checking on him. How is he? The question surprised me. I hadn't meant to ask it. Lachlan studied me, and for a moment the humor faded. Different, he said. Since you got here, he's restless, distracted. He canceled 3 meetings last week, which has literally never happened. He asked me what kind of books women like, which was so alarming I nearly called a doctor. He's been leaving me things, I said, every morning. I know, he told me. in a roundabout, emotionally constipated way that involved him saying, "I've been placing items in the common area," like he was filing an inventory report. Lachlan shook his head. 7 years, Serena. 7 years of nothing. No women, no relationships, no evidence that he was anything other than a very efficient machine. And then you show up, and he starts buying art books and chili flakes. Because I look like her. Lachlan's expression shifted. Careful now, choosing his words. "That's what started it," he said. "The resemblance. He saw you at Kovac's warehouse 3 months ago, and it nearly killed him. I watched the color leave his face. I thought he was having a cardiac event. And now?" "Now?" Lachlan leaned forward. "Now he's terrified. Because the resemblance got him in the door, but what's keeping him there isn't your face. It's you." The words landed in my chest with a weight I wasn't prepared for. He doesn't know me. He knows you better than you think. He's read your university transcripts, your favorite poems, the paper you published on varnish removal techniques. Lachlan raised an eyebrow. Riveting reading, by the way. That's not knowing someone. That's surveillance. For Callum, it's the same thing. He doesn't know how to connect with people normally. He never has. His way of caring is to learn everything about you and then silently provide for your needs without ever acknowledging he's doing it. That's insane. Completely, Lachlan agreed, but it's also genuine. He's not performing, Serena. He's just broken, and broken people show love in broken ways. I stared at the ocean through the window. Lachlan let the silence sit. "I cut my hair," I said finally. I noticed, bold choice. I didn't want him to look at me and see her. Did it work? I thought about this morning, about the way Callum had looked at me without the crack, without the flinch, about his voice when he said, "I never confused you." "Yeah," I said, "I think it did." Lachlan smiled, warm, genuine, the kind of smile his brother had forgotten how to make. "Good," he said, "because my brother needs someone who'll fight for him, even when he's fighting against himself." "I'm not fighting for him," I said. "I'm fighting for me. Right now, that's the same thing." He stood, kissed my cheek, brotherly, casual, and left. And I sat there, in a house that was starting to feel less like a prison and more like a puzzle, and thought about a man who left crocuses on the counter and said they were for me, not for her. A beginning. Small, fragile, uncertain, but real. Chapter 4. The Drowning Man. Callum Reeve. She cut her hair, and I lost the last place to hide. For 11 days, I'd been using the resemblance as a shield. Every time I looked at Serena and felt something stir, something warm, something dangerous, something that had nothing to do with Margot and everything to do with the way this woman occupied a room like she was daring it to shrink around her, I could retreat behind the familiar ache of recognition. Oh, I'd tell myself, it's just the face, it's just the echo, this isn't real feeling, this is grief wearing a mask. Then she stood in my kitchen with her hair shorn to her jaw, jagged and defiant and absolutely nothing like Margot, and the shield was gone. And what was left underneath? God. What was left underneath was want. Pure, undiluted, devastating want for a woman who was not a ghost, not a memory, not a shadow of something I'd lost. Just Serena. Standing in the morning light with her terrible haircut and her furious eyes and her refusal, her absolute magnificent refusal to be anything other than herself. I sat in my office downtown for 3 hours after leaving the house, staring at a spreadsheet I couldn't focus on, replaying her voice. I made sure you'd never confuse me for her again. She'd taken scissors to her own hair at midnight, not to punish me, though she had every right. Not out of vanity, though the shortcut revealed a jawline that would haunt me for different reasons now. She'd done it to survive. To claim her own face back from a dead woman who'd never asked to borrow it. Nina appeared at noon, stood in my office doorway, took one look at me, and closed the door behind her. "You look like you've been hit by a truck," she said. She cut her hair. Nina blinked. Once. The girl cut her hair, and you're catatonic. This is exactly what I warned you about. It's not. I stopped. Started again. It doesn't look like Margot anymore. Good. You don't understand. It doesn't look like Margot, and I couldn't finish the sentence. Nina sat down slowly. Ah, yeah. So the resemblance wasn't the point. Or, rather, it was the entry point, but now I don't have the excuse. I leaned back, pressed my hands to my face. I can't tell myself it's grief. It's not grief. It's her. Just her. Nina was quiet for a long time. Callum, she said finally, and her voice was gentler than I'd heard it in years. You're allowed to feel something for someone new. That's not a betrayal of Margot. It feels like one. Of course it does. That's what guilt is. A cage you build yourself and then refuse to leave because the suffering feels like loyalty. She stood. But it's not loyalty. It's punishment. And Margot wouldn't have wanted you punished. You didn't know her. I knew enough. She loved a man who was difficult and dangerous and incapable of doing anything halfway. That woman didn't die wanting you to spend the rest of your life as a monument to her. She died wanting you to live. I didn't answer. Nina moved to the door. The Harrington Foundation Gala is Friday. You need to attend, and you need to bring her. No. Kovac will be there. So will half of Boston's power structure. If you show up alone, people will talk. If you show up with a wife no one's seen, it sends a message. She's not my wife. She lives in your house. She wears your name's protection. In this world, that's close enough. Nina tilted her head. Friday, 8 o'clock. Tell her to wear something that makes a statement. I told Serena about the gala that evening. Not in person. I couldn't handle in person yet. Not after this morning. Not with the afterimage of her new face still burning behind my eyelids. So I left a note on the counter, which was cowardly, and I knew it. Serena, there's an event Friday evening, the Harrington Foundation Gala at the Copley Plaza. I need to attend. I'd like you to come with me. A stylist will visit Thursday to help with preparations. There's a dress in your closet, the black one. But you should wear whatever you want. See, I'd written and rewritten the note 7 times. The first 6 versions were too formal, too cold, too much like a memo. The 7th was still inadequate, but I'd run out of paper and patience. But you should wear whatever you want. That line had taken me 20 minutes. Because the truth, the version I couldn't write, was, please come. I don't know how to do this without you. I don't know how to stand in a room full of predators and pretend I'm still the ghost, when the only thing I can think about is whether you're eating enough, and if you're sleeping, and what your face looks like when you smile, because I've never actually seen you smile, and I think it might destroy me. But I wrote wear whatever you want and signed it with a letter and told myself it was enough. Friday arrived like a sentencing. I dressed in the master bedroom of the East Wing, which I hadn't redecorated since Margot's death. The same dark furniture, the same heavy curtains, the same photograph on the nightstand. The only one I'd kept. Her, laughing, hand raised. The image Serena had found in the poetry book. I picked it up, looked at it. And for the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel the familiar knife twist of guilt. I felt sadness. Clean, uncomplicated sadness. The kind you feel for something that's truly over. I set the photograph down, face up, and went to meet Serena. She was waiting in the foyer. She had not worn the black dress. She'd chosen something from the closet I hadn't picked, hadn't even noticed, because I'd been so focused on selecting things Margot would have worn that I'd missed the pieces that were purely, unmistakably Serena. It was dark green, emerald silk that caught the light and threw it back in shifting patterns, like sunlight through deep water. The neckline was sharp, angular, plunging just enough to suggest danger without confirming it. Her newly short hair was styled. The stylist had come Thursday, clearly, into something deliberate and architectural, swept back from her face, exposing her neck, her jaw, the full severity of her features. She wasn't beautiful the way Margot had been, soft, approachable, the kind of beauty that invited you closer. She was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful. Precise, functional, capable of drawing blood. You didn't wear the black, I said, because my brain had flatlined, and that was the only observation it could produce. The black was for someone else. She met my eyes. This is for me. I almost told her she was stunning. What came out was, the car's waiting. Smooth, Reeve, eloquent. The Copley Plaza Ballroom was the kind of venue that existed to make powerful people feel more powerful. Vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers, the subtle gleam of old money reflected in every polished surface. 300 guests, all of them connected to Boston's overlapping circles of wealth, politics, and organized crime. The Harrington Foundation was legitimate, technically, but its galas functioned as neutral ground, where legitimate and illegitimate power could mingle without pretense. I hated these events. I attended them because they were necessary, the same way breathing was necessary, not enjoyed, just performed. But walking in with Serena changed something. I felt every eye in the room shift toward us as we crossed the threshold. Not just the usual attention, the wary assessment that followed me everywhere, the calculation of threat and opportunity that my presence provoked. This was different. This was curiosity, hunger, the specific predatory interest that powerful men directed towards something new and beautiful entering their territory. My hand found the small of Serena's back before I could think about it. She didn't flinch, didn't stiffen. In fact, she leaned into the touch, barely perceptible, a millimeter of shift, and the sensation of her warmth through the silk nearly stopped my heart. First time I'd touched her. 11 days in the same house, a contract that said she was mine. And this was the first time my hand had made contact with her body, my palm against the curve of her spine, separated by a layer of emerald silk that suddenly felt like nothing at all. "You're shaking," she murmured, not looking at me, smiling for the room. "I'm not. Your hand is vibrating against my back like a tuning fork. It's the adrenaline. It's the first time you've touched me." I couldn't argue with that. She was right. And the fact that she'd noticed, that she'd been tracking our physical distance with the same precision I had, sent a bolt of something electric through my chest. "Just breathe," she said, still not looking at me, still smiling. "I won't break." The next 2 hours were an exercise in controlled detonation. I introduced Serena to the room as my companion, because calling her my possession was accurate, but socially unacceptable, and calling her anything else felt like a lie I hadn't earned. She was magnificent. I'd expected competence. She was smart, observant, adaptable. I hadn't expected grace. She moved through the crowd like she'd been born to it, engaging politicians with thoughtful questions about their districts, discussing art with collectors who were stunned to find someone at a crime lord's gala who could debate the relative merits of Florentine versus Venetian restoration techniques. She made them laugh. She made them lean closer. She made every man in the room look at her like she was the most interesting person they'd ever met. And every time one of them leaned too close or let his eyes linger too long, my hand pressed harder against her back. Possessive, primal, everything I'd trained myself not to feel. Serena noticed, of course. "You're going to leave a bruise," she whispered between introductions. "Sorry," I loosened my grip. "I didn't say stop." Christ. The trouble arrived at 9:15, wearing a charcoal suit and the smile of a man who'd built his career on other people's suffering. Konstantin Petrov, Russian arms dealer. Connected to what remained of the Volkov network, the people who'd killed Margot. We'd operated in parallel for years, respecting boundaries, avoiding direct conflict. A cold peace built on mutual calculation. He approached us near the bar, champagne in hand, flanked by 2 men who were clearly not there for the shrimp cocktail. "Reeve." Petrov's English was precise, accented, every word placed like a chess piece. "Rare to see you at these affairs." And with company. His eyes moved to Serena, and I watched them narrow with the same slow recognition I'd seen in my own mirror. He saw the resemblance. Even with the short hair, even with the different dress, the angles of her face were close enough to trigger the memory in anyone who'd known Margot. And Petrov had known her, had been at events where she'd attended on my arm, had studied my vulnerability with the patience of a man who collected weaknesses the way other men collected wine. Intriguing, Petrov said, still looking at Serena. For a moment, I thought I was seeing a ghost. She has a familiar quality, your companion, very reminiscent. The word was a scalpel. Serena felt me go rigid. Her hand found mine at her back, not pulling away, but covering it, holding me in place. Serena Calloway, she said, extending her free hand to Petrov with a smile that could have cut glass. And you are? Konstantin Petrov, an old associate of Mr. Reeves. He took her hand, held it a beat too long. Reminiscent was a compliment, Miss Calloway. You remind me of someone Callum once cared about very deeply, someone we all lost. The implication dripped from every syllable. We all lost. As if Margot's death had been a communal tragedy rather than a targeted assassination carried out by people in Petrov's network. I stepped forward. Careful, Konstantin. My voice came from a place I hadn't accessed in months. The basement, the sub-zero layer where the ghost lived. You're one sentence away from a conversation you won't enjoy. Petrov's smile didn't waver, but his eyes recalculated. No offense intended. Merely an observation. He raised his glass. To new beginnings. He drifted away, his men trailing like shadows. Serena's hand was still on mine. Who was that? She asked quietly. Someone connected to the people who killed Margot. I felt her fingers tighten on my hand. And he's here, at this party, drinking champagne 10 feet away from you. This is my world, Serena. It's my world too now, she said. And the way she said it, not with resignation, not with fear, but with the flat, steel-edged certainty of someone who'd already decided to stay. Something inside me shifted. Broke. Rebuilt itself in a different shape. We're leaving, I said. Now? Now. The car was waiting. Brennan opened the door without a word. He'd learned over years of service that when I left an event early, questions were unwelcome. Serena slid in first. I followed. The door closed. The outside world sealed away behind tinted glass and the purr of the engine. We sat in silence as Brennan pulled into traffic. Boston at night. Streets slick with the memory of afternoon rain, neon reflecting off wet asphalt, the city doing its best impression of beauty, while ugliness thrived in every alley and boardroom and waterfront warehouse. Reminiscent, Serena said quietly, staring out her window. That's what he called me, reminiscent. He was trying to provoke me. He succeeded. She turned to look at me. In the dark of the car, with the city lights sliding across her face, she looked less like a weapon and more like a question. Is that all I am, Callum? To everyone in your world? Reminiscent? A copy? The ghost's replacement? No, I said, and the word came out harder than I intended. Then what? The question sat between us in the dark car, enormous and impossible. What are you to me? A woman I bought for wrong reasons. A face I can't look away from. A voice that's replaced the silence I'd been living in. The first person in 7 years who's made me want to answer a question honestly. You're not a replacement, I said. You never were. The resemblance is what made me notice you, but it's not why I stopped. Serena waited. The car moved through the city. Rain started again, soft, tapping the roof like tentative fingers. The first time I saw you, I said, you were carrying a box of files through Kovac's warehouse. You looked annoyed. You glanced over your shoulder, and the light caught your face, and my heart stopped. Because yes, you looked like her. But that's not what I remember most. What do you remember most? Your expression. You were annoyed and impatient and completely unafraid. You were in a building full of criminals, carrying files for a man who could have destroyed you, and you looked like you were running a personal errand that was beneath your intelligence. You looked, I searched for the word, untouchable, not in the way I am, not cold, not shut down. You were untouchable because you simply didn't care enough about their power to be afraid of it. Serena was quiet, watching me. Margot was afraid, I continued. Always. She loved me, but my world terrified her. She hid it well, but I could feel it. The flinch when I came home late, the tension when the phone rang, the way she'd check the locks 3 times before bed. She lived in a state of constant dread, and I told myself it was manageable, that my love was enough to offset the danger. It wasn't, Serena said. Not cruelly. Factually. No, it wasn't. I turned to face her fully. You're not afraid, Serena. Not of me, not of my world, not of the things that live in the dark corners of this life. You're angry, which is different. You push back, which Margot never did. And every day I'm in the same house as you. The distance between who you are and who she was gets wider, and I closed my eyes. And it terrifies me, I finished, because wanting you feels like letting her go, and I don't know how to let her go. The rain intensified. Brennan turned on the wipers. The rhythmic sweep filled the silence. Callum, Serena said. I opened my eyes. She'd moved closer. Not touching, but near enough that I could see the flecks of amber in her dark eyes, could count the small freckles across the bridge of her nose that Margot had never had. Freckles. Such a small thing. Such a devastating thing. You don't have to let her go, Serena said. You just have to make room. I stared at her. You carry her with you. That's not wrong. That's love. But carrying someone doesn't mean there's no space for anything else. She paused. You have 2 hands, Callum. You can hold her memory in one and reach for something new with the other. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. No one had ever said that to me. Not Lachlan, who loved me but didn't understand. Not Nina, who understood but didn't love. No one had told me that grief and want could coexist, that I didn't have to choose between the dead and the living. My hand moved. I didn't decide to move it. My body simply overrode 7 years of discipline and reached for her. My fingers found her jaw. Her skin was warm, softer than I'd imagined, and I'd imagined it more times than I'd ever admit. She went still, not afraid, alert. The way you go still when something important is happening, and you don't want to scare it away. Serena, I said, not Margot, not a slip, not a correction. Her name, chosen deliberately, spoken with full awareness of who I was looking at. Yes, she whispered. I don't know how to do this. I know. I might ruin it. Probably. The ghost of a laugh escaped me. You're not supposed to agree with that. I'm not supposed to be here at all. I'm supposed to be in a studio apartment in Dorchester, eating takeout and pretending my life isn't a disaster. Her hand came up, covered mine where it rested on her jaw. But here I am, in a car with a crime lord who's afraid to touch me, and all I can think is, what? That you're the loneliest person I've ever met, and I'm tired of watching you suffer for something that wasn't your fault. The words landed in my chest like a fist. Not because they were harsh. Because they were true. Brennan pulled into the estate's driveway. The engine idled. Rain hammered the roof. Neither of us moved. My hand was still on her face. Her hand was still on mine. We were suspended in the dark, in the rain, in the narrow space between what was and what could be. I should go inside, Serena said, but she didn't move. Yes, I agreed, and didn't move either. Callum. Yes. If you're going to kiss me, do it because I'm Serena, not because I have her face, not because it's dark and you can pretend, because you see me. I pulled back, looked at her, really looked the way she'd been asking me to since that first night in the kitchen. Short hair, freckles, the wider mouth, the angrier eyes, the jaw that was the same and completely different. Not Margot. Serena. Only Serena. I see you, I said. I didn't kiss her. Not yet. Because she deserved better than a kiss stolen in the back of a car, driven by the momentum of one emotionally devastating evening. She deserved intention, clarity. A man who kissed her because he'd chosen to, not because he'd finally cracked under the weight of his own longing. Instead, I pressed my lips to her forehead. Gentle, deliberate, the kind of kiss that says, I am here, and I am choosing this, and I will be here tomorrow. She exhaled, a long, shaky breath that I felt against my throat. God damn it, Callum, she murmured. What? You were supposed to be a monster. You were supposed to be cold and terrible and easy to hate. This was supposed to be a transaction. Is it? She pulled back, met my eyes. In the dark, hers were luminous, deep, full of something I recognized because I felt it too. The terror of wanting something you're not allowed to have. No, she said. It's not. She got out of the car, walked through the rain to the front door without looking back. I sat there, watching her disappear inside, and pressed my fingers to the place on my jaw where her hand had been. Warm. She'd been warm. And for the first time in 7 years, the cold inside me had somewhere to go. That night, I stood outside her door, not to whisper a dead woman's name, to say hers. Serena. Quietly, like a vow. I didn't knock, didn't open the door, wasn't ready for that. But for the first time, her name wasn't a substitute. It was the point. On the other side of the door, I heard her voice, barely audible. Good night, Callum. She'd been waiting. She'd been listening for me. I pressed my palm flat against the wood, the closest I could come to touching her through the barrier I'd built, and whispered back, Good night. Then I walked to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and looked at Margot's photograph in the moonlight. I'm sorry, I told her, not for wanting her, for taking this long to let myself. The photograph didn't answer. But I swear, in the silver light, through the blur of tears I finally let fall, Margot's smile looked less like grief and more like permission. Chapter 5. The Name She Carries. Serena Calloway. Something changed after the gala. Not dramatically. Callum didn't suddenly become warm or open or any of the things a normal man might become, after holding a woman's face in the dark and saying, I see you. He didn't start joining me for meals or making conversation over coffee or behaving like we shared a life instead of a building. But the absences got shorter. Before the gala, I'd go entire days without seeing him. Now he appeared, briefly, peripherally, like a planet adjusting its orbit. I'd be reading in the library and hear him pass the doorway, his footsteps slowing for a fraction of a second before continuing on. I'd be sketching in the conservatory and look up to find him standing at the far end of the room, watching me, and when our eyes met, he wouldn't flinch. He'd hold my gaze for 3 seconds, 5, sometimes longer. Then he'd nod, just once, a barely perceptible dip of his chin, and disappear. It wasn't much. But for Callum Reeve, it was a revolution. The gifts kept coming, but they changed too. Before the gala, everything had been impersonal in its perfection. The right book, the right pencils, the right chili flakes, research gifts, surveillance gifts, evidence that he knew everything about me and nothing about how to show it. Now the gifts got stranger, more human. A box of cannoli from a bakery in the North End with a sticky note. Mrs. Hale says these are unremarkable. She's wrong. A wool blanket, dove gray, softer than anything I'd ever touched, left on the library couch where he'd clearly noticed me reading in the cold. A small potted fern, because I'd mentioned to Mrs. Hale, once, in passing, not even to him, that the house needed more green. And one morning, 3 weeks after the gala, something that stopped me in the kitchen doorway. A painting. Small, framed, propped against the coffee machine, a watercolor of the ocean as seen from the cliff, this view, the one outside my window. The brushwork was loose, impressionistic, and the colors were wrong in the way that the best art is wrong. The sky too purple, the water too silver, the rocks too dark. It captured not what the ocean looked like, but how it felt, relentless, lonely, beautiful in its violence. I turned it over. On the back, in pencil and handwriting I didn't recognize. M.E. October. M.E. Margot Ellison. He'd given me one of her paintings. I stood in the kitchen, holding a dead woman's art, and felt something crack open inside me that I didn't know how to name. Not jealousy. I'd moved past that, or around it, or through it, in the way you move through a doorway you didn't know was there. Not pity exactly, though there was grief in it. Something more complicated, something that tasted like being trusted with a wound. He was letting me see her. Not the ghost, not the resemblance, the actual woman, her talent, her eye, the way she'd seen this same ocean and translated it into something tender. I hung the painting in my room, beside the window, where I could see it every morning. And I began to understand that Margot Ellison wasn't my enemy. She was my predecessor. And the distance between those two things was where my entire relationship with Callum would either live or die. I asked Brennan to take me somewhere the next morning. He looked surprised. I hadn't used the driving service since arriving, hadn't gone anywhere, hadn't tested the boundaries of my gilded cage. He made a call, confirmed the destination was approved, and pulled the SUV around. Mount Auburn Cemetery, Cambridge. I'd found the burial record online. The Reeve family had a private section. Of course they did. And Margot was there, among the stone and silence, beside Callum's father and grandfather. Brennan parked but didn't follow me. He seemed to understand that some things required privacy, even from bodyguards. The cemetery was quiet in the way old places are quiet. Not empty, but full of a different kind of sound, whined through bare branches. Birdsong that felt inappropriate for a graveyard, the crunch of frozen grass under my boots. I found her. Margot Claire Ellison, 1991 to 2019. Beloved. One word beneath her name. Not daughter, not friend, not fiancé. Beloved. Callum had chosen that word. I was certain of it. A man who couldn't say what he felt in conversation had carved the most naked declaration of love possible into stone, where it would outlast everything. His grief, his empire, his body, his name. Beloved. I knelt beside the grave. The headstone was clean. Someone maintained it, probably Mrs. Hale or one of the staff. Fresh flowers sat in a small vase, anchored to the base. White lilies. I wondered if Callum brought them himself, or if that too was delegated to someone who could perform the task without shattering. Hi, I said, feeling absurd. Talking to a grave. Talking to a woman I'd never met, whose face I shared, whose lover I was slowly, terrifyingly beginning to want. I'm Serena. I think you know that. Or maybe you don't. Maybe there's nothing on the other side of this stone and I'm talking to cold marble. Either way. The wind picked up. I pulled my coat tighter. I'm living in your house, sleeping down the hall from Callum, wearing clothes that were probably chosen to match your taste. Looking at your painting every morning, I paused. You were talented. The watercolor, I can see why he kept it. Silence. Obviously. I didn't choose this, I continued. Any of it. I was sold to him because of a debt and a face that looks like yours, and I've been angry about that. Furious, actually. Because being wanted for someone else's features is a particular kind of erasure that I wouldn't wish on anyone. I traced the carved letters of her name with my fingertip. The stone was cold and smooth, but I'm starting to think it's not that simple. I think he saw my face, and it broke something open in him, and what came out wasn't just memory. It was the ability to feel again, and I happened to be standing there when it happened. A bird sang somewhere nearby, oblivious. He's in pain, Margot, constant bottomless pain. He blames himself for your death, and he's built an entire life around that guilt. A fortress made of silence and control, and the specific cruelty of denying himself anything that might make him happy. I sat back on my heels. I don't know if I can help him. I don't know if he'll let me. But I wanted to come here and tell you that I'm not trying to replace you. I couldn't even if I wanted to. You were the love of his life. I stopped. What was I? A transaction that had grown complicated. A woman who was falling for a man she'd been sold to. A person trying to exist in a space already occupied by a ghost. I'm just trying to be real, I finished. In a house full of ghosts, I'm trying to be real. I placed my hand flat on the stone. Cold seeped through my palm. If you loved him, and I know you did, because the word on this stone tells me everything, then you'd want him to stop suffering. You'd want him to let someone in, even if it's not you, even if it's a stranger with a bad haircut who was dragged here by circumstance. I stood, brushed the frozen grass from my knees. I'll take care of him, I said. If he lets me, I promise. I left without looking back. In the SUV, Brennan glanced at me in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. He drove me home in silence, and when we pulled through the gates, the house looked different. Not warmer, not softer, but less like a cage and more like a place where something could grow if you were patient enough to water it. That evening, Callum came home at 6. I knew because I heard the front door, heard his footsteps in the hall, heard the pause outside the kitchen where he always paused, checking for my presence the way a man might check for a light he'd left burning. I was at the stove. Risotto this time, his grandmother's recipe, which Lachlan had texted me with a winking emoji and the note, "He'll deny he has feelings about this. He's lying." "You're cooking again," Callum said from the doorway. "I'm cooking again." "You went out today." I turned. He was leaning against the doorframe, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened. He looked like a man trying very hard to appear casual and failing in every particular. "Brennan told you." "Brennan tells me everything. That's his job." A pause. "Mount Auburn Cemetery." I held his gaze. "Yes." "You visited Margot's grave?" "Yes." Something moved across his face. Not the crack. That was gone now, sealed over by whatever shift had happened in the car after the gala. This was different. Confusion, maybe. The disorientation of a man encountering a behavior he hadn't anticipated and couldn't categorize. "Why?" he asked. "Because she's part of this. Part of us. Whatever this is." I turned back to the risotto, stirring. "You gave me her painting. I wanted to give her something back." "What did you give her?" "A promise." He was quiet for so long that I thought he'd left, but when I turned around, he was still there. Still in the doorway. And his eyes were bright in a way I'd never seen before. Not with tears, not quite, but with the effort of holding them back. "What promise?" he asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. "That I'd take care of you, if you let me." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Then he crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, took the wooden spoon from my hand, set it on the counter, and pulled me against him. Not a kiss. A hold. His arms around me, crushing, desperate, his face buried in my hair, the short, choppy hair I'd cut to erase a dead woman's shadow, and his entire body shaking with the force of something he'd kept locked for 7 years. I held him back. Not gently. There was nothing gentle about this. This was 2 people clinging to each other in a kitchen that smelled like risotto and grief, the ocean roaring outside, the house groaning around us, and somewhere between the holding and the shaking, the wall came down. Not all of it, but enough. He didn't cry. I don't think Callum Reeve had cried since the day they showed him Margot's body, but he breathed, great, ragged breaths that I felt in my own chest, like his lungs had forgotten how to expand and were relearning against the resistance of years. "Serena," he said into my hair. Just my name. But the way he said it, like it was the first word of a language he was teaching himself to speak. God. "I'm here," I said. His arms tightened. "I know," he whispered. "That's the problem. You're here, and I don't know how to want you without it feeling like a crime." "It's not a crime. It feels like one." "Feelings lie. You told me that yourself, on the phone, the day we met. You said especially me. Like touching me would be the worst thing you could do. But you're touching me now." I pulled back enough to look at his face. "And the world hasn't ended." He stared at me, those pale blue eyes, wide open, stripped of every defense. "It might," he said. "Then let it." He kissed me. Not the forehead, not the careful, deliberate, I am choosing this consciously kiss from the car. This was something else. His mouth found mine, and it was like a dam breaking, 7 years of pressure releasing in a single devastating point of contact. His hands were in my hair, on my jaw, sliding down my neck with a desperation that should have frightened me. It didn't. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. I kissed him back with everything I had, every day of invisibility in this house, every gift I'd cataloged, every night I'd heard his footsteps outside my door and pressed my hand to the wood and wished he'd knock. He tasted like coffee and something sharper, something that might have been fear or might have been the specific flavor of a man breaking his own rules for the first time in nearly a decade. When we pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. The risotto was burning. Neither of us moved to save it. That, I managed, was not for show. "No," he agreed. His forehead was pressed against mine, his hands still cradling my face, his thumbs tracing small arcs across my cheekbones. That was the most selfish thing I've done in 7 years. It wasn't selfish. It was. I kissed you because I wanted to. Not because it was right or safe or part of any arrangement. I kissed you because I have been thinking about your mouth for 3 weeks, and I couldn't stand one more second of not knowing what it felt like. Heat flooded my chest, not embarrassment, something more primal. That's not selfish, Callum, that's human. I've been trying not to be human for 7 years. It's the only thing I was good at. You're terrible at it. You leave cannoli and ferns and dead women's paintings on the kitchen counter because you can't figure out how to say good morning. That's the most human thing I've ever seen. He almost laughed. Almost. The sound got stuck somewhere in his throat, half-formed, like a muscle remembering a movement it hadn't performed in years. But the attempt was there, real, visible, a man's body trying to remember joy. "The risotto is ruined," he said. "Completely. I'll order something. Or we could just stand here and not eat and keep doing this." He pulled back, looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face. Open, unguarded, terrified, and wanting in equal measure. "Serena." "Yes. I need to say something, and I need you to hear it." "Okay." He took my hands, held them between us, his thumbs running across my knuckles in the same restless pattern he used when he was processing something difficult. "I bought you," he said. "That's the truth. I paid for you, brought you here, set terms and conditions for your life without your input or consent. That was wrong. It was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway because I wanted you close, and I didn't know another way. Callum, let me finish." His grip tightened on my hands. "I told myself it was mercy, that I was saving you from Kovac, and maybe that's partially true. But the real reason, the honest, ugly, indefensible reason, is that I saw your face and felt something I thought was dead in me, and I was willing to take your freedom to keep it." The words hung in the kitchen air, heavy with smoke from the ruined risotto and the weight of a confession 7 years in the making. "I know," I said. He blinked. "You know?" "I've known since I found the photograph. Since that first night in the kitchen." I squeezed his hands. "You bought me because of my face. That's a fact." It's also a fact that you've spent every day since trying to see past it. The gifts, the distance, the way you stand outside my door saying my name. You've been fighting your own reasons for buying me since the moment I arrived. That doesn't make it okay. No, it doesn't. I released one of his hands and pressed my palm to his chest. His heart was hammering beneath my fingers. But here's the thing, Callum. I'm not the same woman who signed that contract in Kovac's warehouse. I was desperate then. Powerless. I signed because I had no choice. And now? Now I have a choice. I could leave. You'd let me? I know that. The man who kissed me just now would open the front door and drive me back to Dorchester himself if I asked. Yes, he said quietly, I would. I'm not asking. He went very still. I'm staying, I said, not because of the contract, not because of the debt. Because you gave me a dead woman's painting, and it was the most honest thing anyone has ever done for me. Because you're terrified of wanting me, and you want me anyway. Because I went to Margot's grave today and promised her I'd take care of you, and I don't break promises. Serena. But I need you to hear this. I held his gaze. I'm not staying as your possession, not as a transaction or a memorial or a shadow of someone you lost. I'm staying as me, Serena. And if you can't see me, if you keep looking at me and seeing her, then I will walk out that door and you'll have to live with the fact that you lost 2 women. Not because of a bomb, but because you couldn't let go of a ghost. The words were hard. They needed to be. Callum's eyes searched mine and I let him look. Let him see everything. The fear, the want, the anger that hadn't fully faded, the impossible, idiotic hope that this could become something real. I see you, he said. The same words from the car, but deeper now, heavier with meaning. I see you, Serena Calloway, not the face, not the resemblance, you. And I'm not going to pretend it's simple or clean or anything other than a colossal mess, but I see you, and I want you, just you. The risotto was beyond saving. We ordered Thai food. We ate it sitting on the kitchen floor, backs against the cabinets, shoulders touching. He told me about his grandmother's risotto and how she used to smack his hand when he stirred too fast. I told him about my father's kitchen, the Calabrian chili flakes, the way food was the only language my family spoke fluently. It wasn't romantic. It was better. It was real. Later, walking me to my room, he paused outside my door. The old ritual, the footsteps, the pause, the name whispered through wood. But tonight, the door was open, and I was standing in it. You don't have to whisper anymore, I said. He looked at me, at the open door, at the room beyond it, the bed, the window, the painting of Margot's ocean hanging in the moonlight. I'm not ready, he said. And the honesty of it, the vulnerability of admitting he wasn't ready, after a kiss like that, after a confession like that, cracked my heart open wider than any gesture he'd made. I know, I said. That's okay. It's not that I don't want. I know what you want. I can feel it every time you're in the same room as me. I leaned against the doorframe. But wanting and being ready are different things. Take your time, Callum. I'm not going anywhere. He reached out, brushed the back of his fingers along my jaw, so lightly I might have imagined it. You cut your hair for me, he said. I cut my hair for me. I know. That's why it matters. He stepped back. 1 step. 2. The distance between us reasserting itself, but different now. Not a wall, but a threshold. A space he was choosing to hold open rather than seal shut. Good night, Serena. Good night, Callum. He walked to the east wing. I closed my door, and I stood there in the dark, pressing my fingers to my lips where his mouth had been, and thought about a word carved into stone. Beloved. I wondered if I'd ever earned that word from him. I wondered if I already had. Chapter 6. The First Touch. Serena Calloway and Callum Reeve. The storm arrived on a Tuesday, 3 days after he kissed me. It had been building all afternoon, the sky bruising from gray to violet, the ocean turning the color of wet slate, wind pulling at the house like something wanting in. Mrs. Hale had gone home early. Brennan was stationed in the gatehouse. The estate staff had been dismissed by 4. Just us. Callum and I had existed in a careful new equilibrium since the kitchen, not avoiding each other, not quite seeking each other out, but allowing proximity. He sat in the library while I sketched in the conservatory. We ate dinner at the same table, actual conversation now instead of charged silence. He told me about a property deal in Charlestown. I told him about the Caravaggio I'd been studying before my life collapsed. Normal things. Terrifying in their normalcy. We hadn't kissed again. He hadn't tried. I hadn't pushed. The understanding between us was fragile. New glass, still cooling, and neither of us wanted to tap it too hard. But the weather didn't care about our careful choreography. At 7:15, the power went out. Not a flicker, not a warning. One moment, the house was lit and humming, and the next, black. Total, absolute darkness. I was in the upstairs hallway when it happened, walking from my room toward the stairs, and the darkness swallowed me whole. No windows in this section of the corridor. No ambient light. Just the wind howling outside and the sudden, suffocating awareness that the walls were too close and the ceiling was too low and the air was running out. It wasn't running out. I knew that. My lungs didn't know that. The panic came fast. Not the slow creep of anxiety, but the full-body siege. Chest constricting. Vision narrowing to a point even though there was nothing to see. Hands going numb. I pressed my back against the wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor, knees to chest, trying to breathe through a throat that had forgotten how. It wasn't the dark. It was the closet. Before the sale, before the contract, before Callum. Kovac's men had come for me 3 days after my father died. I'd been packing up his apartment, sorting through a dead man's belongings, trying to figure out how to bury someone when you couldn't afford the casket, when 2 of them appeared at the door. Not threatening, exactly. Polite in the way that men with guns are polite when they know you have no recourse. Mr. Kovac would like to discuss your father's outstanding obligations. They'd taken me to the warehouse, not the main office, a back room. Small, windowless, with a lock on the outside. They'd put me in and closed the door and left me there for 9 hours. 9 hours in the dark. No explanation, no water, no indication of whether I'd ever come out. When they finally opened the door, I'd been shaking so badly I couldn't stand. Kovac himself was there, smiling, offering his hand like a gentleman helping a lady from a carriage. I hope that clarified the urgency of your situation, he'd said. It had. I'd agreed to the transfer the next day. Now, sitting in Callum's hallway in the dark, my body was back in that closet. Every rational thought I possessed was screaming that I was safe, that this was a house, that the power would return. My body didn't listen. It never did. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard him. Footsteps, fast. Not his usual measured pace. This was urgent, almost running, and I heard him calling my name before he reached me. Serena? I tried to answer. What came out was a sound I didn't recognize. Thin, airless, the noise an animal makes when it's cornered. Serena, I'm here. Where are you? A phone flashlight cut through the dark, blinding after the total blackness. And then he was there, kneeling in front of me, his face sharp with concern. Hey, look at me. I couldn't. My eyes wouldn't focus. The walls were still closing in. The closet was still shrinking. Kovac's smile was still. Callum's hands found my face. Warm, steady. The calluses on his palms rough against my cheekbones. Serena, you're in the house. You're safe. No one is going to hurt you. Can't. Breathe. Yes, you can. Breathe with me. In through your nose. Count to 4. He counted. Slow, even. his voice dropping to a register I'd never heard, low and calm and certain, like he'd done this before, like he'd been the one hyperventilating in a dark hallway and knew exactly what the other side felt like. I followed his count. 1 breath, 2, 3. The walls stopped moving. The closet receded. Reality reassembled itself piece by piece. The feel of carpet beneath me, the sound of rain hammering the roof, the warmth of Callum's hands still holding my face. "There you are," he said softly. "Stay with me." "Kovac, I managed. He locked me in a room, before, when he wanted me to agree to the transfer. 9 hours in the dark." Something changed in Callum's face. Not the crack, not the softening I'd been learning to read over these weeks. This was something else entirely. Cold, absolute. The temperature in his expression dropped so fast I could almost feel the air chill. "He locked you in a room," Callum repeated, and his voice was the flattest, most controlled thing I'd ever heard from him, flatter than the phone call at Kovac's warehouse, flatter than the "I see you in the car." This was the ghost. Not the man who'd kissed me in the kitchen, the other one. The one who ran a crime syndicate and had people afraid to say his name. For 9 hours, I confirmed. His thumb stilled on my cheekbones, his jaw locked. I watched a muscle tick in his temple, rapid fire, like a countdown. "I'm going to kill him," he said. Not "I want to kill him," not "I could kill him." "I'm going to." Present tense, statement of intent. Callum. Not tonight. He exhaled, and I watched him force the ghost back down, lock it in whatever cage he kept it in. The warmth returned to his hands, his voice, his eyes. "Tonight I'm here. With you. That's all that matters." I carried her downstairs. She protested. Of course she did, because Serena Calloway would protest being rescued from a burning building on the grounds that she could walk through fire perfectly well on her own. But I didn't listen. I scooped her off the hallway floor and carried her down the stairs and through the dark house to the living room, where I'd already lit the fireplace before the power went out. Old habits. Margot had loved fires and storms. The thought came and went without the usual devastation, a memory, not a wound. Progress. I set Serena on the couch, wrapped the dove-gray blanket around her shoulders, and went to the kitchen for water. When I came back, she was staring at the fire, her face caught between shadow and light, her breathing still uneven. "Drink," I said, pressing the glass into her hands. She drank. Her fingers were still trembling. I sat beside her, not close enough to crowd, close enough to reach. "You don't have to tell me," I said. "About Kovac, about what happened." "I want to," she set the glass down. "You told me about Margot, about the bomb. You gave me the worst piece of yourself, because you trusted me to hold it." She pulled the blanket tighter. "This is mine." So she told me. Not just the closet. Everything. Her father's gambling. The debts that piled up like geological layers, each one burying the last, each one heavier. The way he'd looked at her in the final months. Shame so thick it was almost visible. Apologizing with his eyes, because he couldn't bring himself to use words. The heart attack that killed him at 53, alone, on the floor of a betting shop. The men who came to her door. The 9 hours. The way Kovac had smiled, like she was already goods, already inventory, and explained her options. Option A, work off the debt in ways she wouldn't survive. Option B, be transferred to another family as settlement. A transaction. Clean. Simple. "I chose you," she said, looking at the fire. Out of 2 terrible options, I chose the one attached to a man I'd never met, because at least your condition, no one touches her, meant I'd be left alone. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd chosen me because I promised not to touch her. And now we were here, in the firelight, and all I wanted was to never stop. "Kovac is going to answer for what he did to you," I said. "Is that the ghost talking or the man who kissed me in the kitchen?" "Both." She turned to look at me. Firelight caught the angles of her face, the sharp jaw, the freckles, the the short hair that fell across her forehead in a way that was entirely unmistakably hers. "You know what's strange?" she said. "What?" "Kovac locked me in the dark for 9 hours, and I've had nightmares about it ever since." "But you live in the same world, you do the same kind of things, and I feel safer with you than I've felt anywhere." The words landed in my chest like a key turning in a lock. "That's not strange," I said. "That's trust. Is that what this is?" "I don't know. I haven't felt it in 7 years." She laughed. Short, surprised, real. The first genuine laugh I'd heard from her. It was lower than I'd expected, with a rough edge, like it had been stored somewhere dark and dusty and hadn't been used in too long. It was the best sound I'd ever heard. "We're a disaster," she said. "Completely. A crime lord and his purchased woman sitting in the dark, comparing traumas. You're not my purchased woman. Technically, I am. Technically, you're a pain in my ass who burned my risotto and cut her hair without permission." She stared at me. Then she laughed again, really laughed, the kind that shook her shoulders and crinkled the corners of her eyes, and the sound broke something in me that had been holding for so long I'd forgotten it was there. I was smiling. I didn't realize it until I felt the unfamiliar pull of muscles in my face. Smiling. At her. Because of her. For the first time in 7 years. He smiled, and I understood everything. Not the almost smile, not the ghost of one. A real, unguarded, unconscious smile that transformed his face from something carved and cold into something devastatingly, heartbreakingly human. It lasted 4 seconds. I counted, and in those 4 seconds, I saw the man Margot had fallen in love with. Not the ghost. Not the syndicate head. Just Callum, tired and scarred and trying so hard to be something other than what his grief had made him. I reached for him. Not his face. Not his hand. I pressed my palm flat against his chest, over his heart, the way I'd done in the kitchen when I told him I was staying. His pulse hammered beneath my fingers. "Still alive," I whispered. He looked down at my hand, up at my face. "Barely," he said. "Liar. Your heart's going about 200 beats a minute." "That's your fault." "I know." He covered my hand with his, pressed it harder against his chest, like he wanted me to feel every erratic beat, wanted me to know exactly what I did to him. "Serena." "Yes." "If I touch you tonight, really touch you, I won't be able to go back to the way things were. I won't be able to stand outside your door and whisper your name and pretend that's enough. It was never enough. I know, but it was safe. I don't want safe anymore." He pulled my hand from his chest and raised it to his lips, kissed my knuckles, turned my hand over and kissed my palm, pressed his mouth to the inside of my wrist, where my pulse was racing so fast it must have felt like a hummingbird against his lips. "Tell me to stop," he murmured against my skin. "No." "Serena." "Callum Reeve, if you ask me one more time whether I'm sure, I am going to scream." He looked up at me. The fire cast half his face in gold, the other half in shadow. In the warm light, his eyes looked less like ice and more like the ocean on a clear morning, pale, deep, full of things moving beneath the surface. "You're sure," he said. "Not a question this time. I've been sure since you left a potted fern on my windowsill because I mentioned the house needed more green. I've been sure since you gave me a dead woman's painting because it was the most honest thing you could think of. I've been sure since you looked at my terrible haircut and said that was the problem." He stood, pulled me up with him. And then he kissed me the way he'd been wanting to since the kitchen. Not desperate this time, not breaking. This was deliberate, thorough. The kiss of a man who had decided to stop running and was now standing completely, terrifyingly still. His hands slid into my hair. Mine found the back of his neck. The blanket fell from my shoulders and neither of us noticed. The storm raged outside. Inside we were the only sound. He carried me again. This time I didn't protest. Not to my room, not to the east wing, to the room between them. A guest bedroom, neutral ground, belonging to neither his past nor my captivity. He laid me on the bed like I was something fragile, and I pulled him down before he could mistake gentleness for distance. "Don't be careful with me," I said. "I want to be." "Why?" "Because you deserve someone who's careful, someone who pays attention to every inch of you. Not the face, not the resemblance. You." His fingers traced my collarbone, feather light. "This freckle here, Margot didn't have it. Callum, this scar." His thumb found the thin white line on my shoulder, a souvenir from a childhood fall. "She didn't have this either." "You don't have to catalog the differences." "Yes, I do." His voice was rough, certain. "Every difference is proof that you're you, that I'm here because of who you are, not who you look like." My throat closed. No one had ever tried so hard to see me. Not my father, who'd loved me but been too lost in his own destruction to notice mine. Not the handful of men I'd dated who'd been drawn to my face and indifferent to the person behind it. Not anyone. Until him. I pulled him down and showed him all the ways I was different from a ghost. She fell asleep with her head on my chest. I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't. For the first time in years, my body felt heavy and warm and willing to rest. But because I was afraid that if I closed my eyes, I'd wake up and she'd be gone. That this would have been a dream. That I'd find myself alone in the east wing, Margot's photograph on the nightstand, the house empty and echoing. So I stayed awake, listened to her breathe, counted her heartbeats against my ribs, memorized the weight of her 5'7" of stubbornness and courage, and a temper that could strip paint, draped across me like she'd been doing it for years instead of hours. The storm had passed. Through the windows the sky was clearing, stars appearing one by one like someone was turning on lights in a distant city. The power was still out. I didn't care. I didn't need electricity. I had her. And for the first time since a morning 7 years ago, when I'd left the house angry and come home to smoke and sirens, the silence in my chest wasn't empty. It was full. I woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment I didn't know where I was. The bed was unfamiliar, neither mine nor his, but somewhere in between. The sheets smelled like him, cedar, clean linen, the particular warmth of a man's skin, and when I reached across the mattress, his side was empty but still warm. He hadn't been gone long. I pulled on his shirt, discarded on the floor, wrinkled, smelling like him, and followed the coffee scent downstairs. Callum was in the kitchen, standing at the stove, barefoot, in yesterday's trousers and nothing else. The morning light caught the planes of his back, the muscle, the scars I'd traced with my fingers in the dark, the way his shoulders moved as he cracked eggs into a pan. He was making breakfast. For me. The domesticity of it. This man, this dangerous, grief-haunted, complicated man, standing barefoot in his kitchen making me eggs because he'd woken up next to me and decided the first thing he wanted to do was feed me. Something in my chest expanded so fast it almost hurt. He turned, sensing me, saw me in his shirt, in his kitchen, in his mourning. Something soft crossed his face. Not quite a smile, not quite surprise, but the expression of a man seeing something he'd been afraid to want. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He put a plate in front of me, eggs, toast, sliced tomatoes, a cup of coffee, black, 1 sugar, exactly how I took it. He sat across from me, looked at me, and said, "Your name is Serena Calloway. You are not a transaction. You are not a ghost. You are the most infuriating, stubborn, extraordinary person I have ever met, and I'm sorry it took me this long to say that." I stared at him. "You rehearsed that," I said. "All morning, while making the eggs." "How many times?" 7. 7. I pressed my lips together, fighting the smile that threatened to split my face. Callum Reeve, terrifying crime lord, stood in his kitchen, rehearsing a speech about my name to a pan of scrambled eggs. They were the perfect audience, very non-judgmental. I laughed. He smiled. Not 4 seconds this time. Longer. Long enough that I could memorize every line of it. The way it changed his face, softened the angles, made him look younger and less like a man who'd spent 7 years trying to die without admitting it. "The eggs are getting cold," he said. "I don't care. Eat anyway, you're too thin. Did you just eat the eggs, Serena?" I ate the eggs. They were perfect. Everything was perfect. And sitting across from him in the morning light, wearing his shirt, eating food he'd made with hands that had held my face in the dark and told me to breathe. I thought, this is what it feels like to be seen. Not admired, not desired, not purchased. Seen. And it was worth everything I'd survived to get here. Chapter 7. The Price of Keeping Her. Callum Reeve and Serena Calloway. The photograph arrived on a Monday. Not in an envelope. Not via email. Printed, 8 by 10, glossy, slid under the front door of the estate like a love letter from someone who wanted me to know they could reach me. Serena and me at the Harrington Gala, my hand at the small of her back, her face tilted up toward mine, caught mid-sentence, the emerald dress catching the light. The angle was intimate, deliberate, taken by someone who understood exactly what this image communicated. On the back, in block letters, "The ghost has a heart." That's useful. Nina found me in my office 20 minutes later, staring at the photograph like it might detonate. "It's already online," she said, setting her laptop on my desk. The screen showed a Boston gossip site, low rent, high traffic, the kind that thrived on photographing powerful people in compromising situations. The headline read, "Boston's Ghost King finally has a queen?" The article was thin on facts and heavy on speculation. Who was the woman? How long had the city's most reclusive crime figure been hiding a relationship? Was this why Callum Reeve had been seen less frequently at certain operations? Was he going soft? Going soft. In my world, that phrase was a death sentence. "Who took it?" I asked. "We're working on it, but the note under the door suggests someone with direct access, not a paparazzo. Someone who wanted you to see it before the public did." Nina paused. "Callum, there's something else." There was always something else. "Kovac called this morning. He wants a meeting." My blood went cold. "About?" He didn't say. But the timing isn't coincidental. No. It wouldn't be. Viktor Kovac was many things. Cruel, methodical, patient in the way snakes are patient, but never random. If he was calling the same morning a compromising photograph appeared, he was the one who'd taken it, or commissioned it, or been waiting for exactly this moment to strike. "Set the meeting," I said. "Tomorrow. His territory. His terms. I want to hear what he thinks he has." "And Serena?" "She doesn't know about this yet." "She'll find out. The article is spreading. Then I'll tell her myself." Nina studied me with the specific expression she reserved for decisions she disagreed with but wouldn't challenge. "Be careful how you handle this, Callum. Your instinct will be to push her away, to protect her by creating distance. That is my instinct. And the last time you followed that instinct, you arranged for Margot to leave the city. She took your car to the airport. The bomb was under your car." The words landed like a blow to the sternum. Because she was right. 7 years ago, I'd received intelligence about a threat. My response: send Margot away. Protect her by putting distance between us. She was supposed to drive to Logan Airport, catch a flight to her parents in Connecticut. Safe. Out of range. But her car had an engine light. She'd taken mine. The bomb had been under the driver's seat. My attempt to save her had killed her. And now, staring at a photograph of Serena, the woman I'd sworn I wouldn't lose the way I'd lost Margot, my first instinct was to do the exact same thing. Send her away. Create distance. protect her by removing her from my orbit. The pattern was so clear it made me sick. I hear you, I told Nina. Set the meeting. I found the article myself at 11 in the morning because the internet is faster than even Callum Reeve. I was in the conservatory sketching when my phone buzzed with a Google alert I'd set up weeks ago. A habit from my old life, monitoring any mentions of the Reeve syndicate, because knowledge was the only currency I had in this world. The photograph was good. Professional quality. We looked like a couple, like people who'd chosen each other. The comment section was less generous. Who is she? Another disposable girlfriend for the crime lord? She looks familiar. Is that the Calloway girl? The one whose father owed half of Southie? Did he buy her? LOL. Ghost King's got a type. She looks exactly like the dead fiancé. Creepy. I closed the phone. Opened it again. She looks exactly like the dead fiancé. Even strangers could see it. Even anonymous internet commenters armed with nothing but old photographs and boredom could look at my face and see someone else. I'd cut my hair. Changed my clothes. Visited Margot's grave and made peace with her ghost. I'd kissed the man, heard him say my name like it meant something, slept in his arms and woken up to eggs and declarations. And the world still saw Margot. I set down the sketchbook, went looking for Callum. He was in his office. When I opened the door, he was standing at the window, his back to me, phone pressed to his ear. The tension in his shoulders was visible from across the room, coiled, compressed, the posture of a man holding something volatile in check. He turned when he heard me. Something crossed his face, relief, followed immediately by a harder expression, preparation, bracing. I saw the photograph, I said. I know. He set down the phone. I was going to tell you. When? Before or after half of Boston decided I'm your dead fiancé's body double? He flinched. Good. He should flinch. It's being handled, he said. Nina's working on getting the article pulled. The photograph was taken by someone connected to Kovac. Kovac. The name tasted like the closet. Like dark rooms and 9 hours of nothing. What does he want? A meeting. Tomorrow. Callum's jaw tightened. Sit down, Serena. There's more. I didn't sit. I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms and waited. He told me. All of it. Kovac wasn't interested in the debt anymore. That was settled when I was transferred. What he wanted was leverage. Callum's growing attachment to me made me valuable in ways that had nothing to do with money. Kovac was threatening to contact the FBI, frame the transfer as human trafficking. Me as the victim, Callum as the trafficker. Unless Callum surrendered control of the harbor shipping routes, territory the Reeves syndicate had held for 2 decades. If I don't give him the routes, Callum said, his voice flat, clinical, the ghost in full control. He goes to the feds. You get arrested as a material witness. I get indicted. The syndicate collapses. And if you do give him the routes, we lose 60% of our revenue. The other families see it as weakness. We get carved up within 6 months. Both options ended in destruction. I waited for the part one knew was coming, the part that had been written into his DNA by a car bomb 7 years ago. There's a third option, Callum said, and his eyes wouldn't meet mine. No. He hadn't even said it yet, and I was already refusing. Serena, you want to send me away. I kept my voice level, though everything inside me was screaming. Disappear me. New identity. New city. Remove the leverage by removing me from the equation. His silence confirmed it. It's the safest option, he said. For who? For you. Bullshit. The word cracked through the room like a gunshot. It's the safest option for you, because if I'm gone, you don't have to be afraid. You can go back to being the ghost. Go back to your empty house and your photograph and your carefully maintained grief, and you never have to risk losing someone again. That's not. You did this before. I stepped into the room, closing the distance he was trying to create. You told Margot to leave. To get on a plane, go somewhere safe. She took your car, and she died. The color drained from his face. Don't, he said, and his voice had gone hoarse. I'm not going to stop, because you need to hear this. I was close enough now to see the pulse hammering in his throat, the white-knuckle grip of his hands on the edge of the desk. You tried to protect Margot by sending her away, and it killed her. That wasn't your fault. The bomb was. But the instinct, the pattern, protect by distancing, save by erasing, that's your fault. That's the thing you do. And you're about to do it again. I'm trying to keep you alive. His voice broke on the last word, the mask slipping, the ghost fracturing. By making me disappear? By turning me into another ghost? You've already got one of those, Callum. You don't need two. The fight that followed was the worst thing I'd ever lived through. Not because of the shouting, though there was shouting, raw and ugly, his voice ricocheting off the office walls while mine matched it decibel for decibel. Because of what we said. He told me I didn't understand what Kovac was capable of. I told him I'd been locked in a closet for 9 hours. I understood perfectly. He told me his world destroyed everything it touched. I told him I wasn't everything. I was me, and I was harder to destroy than he thought. He told me he couldn't survive losing me. I told him he'd never had me. Not really. Not freely. Because he'd been too afraid to let the contract go. Too afraid to exist in a world where I stayed because I chose to, rather than because a piece of paper demanded it. That one landed. I saw it hit. Saw the words penetrate the armor, reach the soft place underneath, the place where he was still a man standing in a driveway while paramedics covered a body with a sheet. You're right, he said, and his voice had gone quiet. Destroyed. I bought you. I kept you. I told myself it was protection, but it was possession. And now I'm doing it again, trying to control what happens to you because I can't handle the alternative. The alternative is trusting me. The alternative is watching you die. The alternative is letting me fight beside you instead of hiding me behind you. He stared at me, and then something happened that I was not prepared for. Callum Reeve, the ghost, the syndicate head, the man who hadn't cried since they showed him Margot's body on a stretcher, broke. Not gracefully, not the single artistic tear of a man in a movie. His face crumpled, his shoulders caved, and a sound came out of him that I'd never heard from any human being. A low, gutted animal sound, like something being torn out by the roots. He sat down on the floor. Just sat. In his office. In his expensive suit, the man who terrified half of Boston, sitting on the floor with his back against the desk and his hands over his face, and 7 years of grief, finally, finding its way out. I knelt beside him, pulled his hands from his face, held them. I can't lose you, he whispered, and his voice was wrecked. Stripped of everything. Authority, control, the carefully maintained fiction of a man who felt nothing. I know I have no right to say that. You're not mine. You were never supposed to be mine. I bought you, and I kept you, and I told myself every day that it was temporary, that the contract had an end, that eventually you'd leave and I'd go back to the way things were. Callum. But I can't go back. His eyes were red, raw, more open than I'd ever seen them. You ruined it. You ruined the silence, and the distance, and the careful, controlled nothing I'd built. You cooked in my kitchen and cut your hair and visited her grave and made me feel things I'd sworn I was done with. I know. And now, Kovac wants to take you, and all I can think about is Margot in that car, and I can't. Serena, I can't. I pulled him against me. Held him the way he'd held me during the storm, tight, unbreakable, a human anchor against the flood. He shook. I held on. The office was silent except for his breathing and the ocean outside and the small, raw sounds of a man learning that grief doesn't end, it transforms. It becomes something you carry, not something that carries you. And sometimes, if you're brave enough, you set it down. When the shaking stopped, when his breathing steadied, when he'd come back from wherever the grief had taken him, he pulled away enough to look at me. Stay, he said, just the word, no qualifiers, no conditions. I'm not leaving. Not because of the contract. Forget the contract. I'm staying because you're an impossible, infuriating man who makes me breakfast and leaves ferns on my windowsill and cries on his office floor because he's afraid of losing someone he won't even admit he loves. He stared at me. I love you, he said. The words were raw, unpolished. They came out like they'd been extracted under duress, which, in a way, they had. I love you, Serena, not because of the face, not because of Margot, because you burned my risotto and yelled at me in my own office, and went to a dead woman's grave to promise her you'd take care of me, because you're the most stubborn, fearless, extraordinary. I kissed him. On the floor, in his office, his face still wet, his hands still shaking. Not gentle, not careful, a kiss that said, I am here, I am choosing this, I am choosing you, with all your grief and your ghosts and your terrible coping mechanisms, and the way you can't say what you feel without being forced to the edge of a cliff first. When I pulled back, his forehead fell against mine. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered, not because you bought me, because I choose to stay. Do you understand the difference? Yes. Then stop trying to send me away. Stop trying to protect me from your world by removing me from it. I survived Kovac's closet. I survived your silence. I survived finding out I was bought for a dead woman's face. I am not fragile, Callum, and you don't get to decide what I can handle. I know. Then what do we do about Kovac? He was quiet for a moment, processing, reorganizing. I could almost see the ghost reassembling itself, not to replace the man underneath, but to work alongside him. Two versions of Callum Reeve, finally operating in concert. We destroy him, Callum said, not by hiding, not by running, by taking apart everything he has until there's nothing left to threaten us with. How? Nina's been building a file on Kovac's operations for 6 months. Shipping manifests, money trails, witness statements from people he's burned. Enough to hand the FBI a case so airtight they'd have to act on it. We give them Kovac. Every operation, every connection, everybody, he's buried. He goes to federal prison, and his leverage disappears with him. You'd turn informant? Not formally. Nina has contacts in the Bureau who can receive the evidence anonymously. Kovac won't know where it came from until he's in handcuffs. And the photograph? The article? Let it run. Something shifted in his expression. Not the ghost, but the man. Clear-eyed, decided. Kovac wants the world to see you as my weakness. We make it his mistake. If I'm public about you, openly, deliberately, it looks like confidence, not vulnerability. A man hiding a woman is scared. A man standing beside one is strong. You want to go public. I want to stop hiding you. There's a difference. The echo of his words from weeks ago, I see you, resonated through the room. But first, he said, reaching into his desk drawer, there's something I need to do. He pulled out the contract. The original, the one that had made me his property. Signed in Kovac's warehouse on the worst night of my life, witnessed by men who'd looked at me like inventory. He held it up. This is what Kovac is leveraging, he said. The contract, the transaction, the evidence that I purchased you. Without it, he has nothing but hearsay. You can't just... He tore it. Straight down the middle. Then again, and again. Methodical, deliberate, reducing 30 pages of legal language to confetti. I watched the pieces fall from his hands like snow. No more contract, he said. No more transaction. You're a free woman, Serena, effective immediately. You owe me nothing. You belong to no one. My throat closed. And if I want to belong to someone, I whispered. His eyes met mine. Then you choose him, he said. Free and clear, no debt, no obligation. Just want. I looked at the shredded contract on the floor, at the man kneeling in the ruins of his own control, offering me the one thing no one had ever given me. Choice. I choose you, I said. He exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, like a man surfacing after being held under. Then we fight together, he said, No more hiding, no more running. Together. Together, I agreed. He pulled me against him, held me in the wreckage of the contract, the office, the carefully maintained fiction that any of this had ever been just business. And somewhere in the quiet that followed, I heard what he didn't say. Not I'm going to kill him. Not I'll protect you. Something simpler, truer. I'm here. It was enough. Chapter 8. Ghosts Laid to Rest. Callum Reeve and Serena Calloway. Kovac fell on a Thursday. Not with a bullet. Not with a bomb. With paper. Nina had spent 6 months building the file. Shipping manifests, forged customs declarations, wire transfers to offshore accounts, witnessed depositions from 3 former lieutenants who'd been quietly relocated to different states in exchange for their cooperation. She'd assembled it with the precision of a surgeon. Every document cross-referenced, every timeline verified, every piece of evidence positioned to create a narrative so damning that even the most cautious federal prosecutor couldn't ignore it. The file was delivered anonymously to the Boston field office of the FBI at 9 a.m. By noon, federal agents had raided 3 Kovac warehouses, 2 shipping companies, and the brownstone in Back Bay, where Victor kept his off-the-books accounting. By 4, Kovac himself was in handcuffs. I watched the news coverage from my office. Serena sat in the chair across from me, her feet tucked beneath her, a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. We didn't speak. Just watched. The footage showed Kovac being led from his brownstone in a gray suit, his face a mask of controlled fury. He scanned the crowd of reporters and onlookers, searching, and I knew, with the certainty of a man who understands predators because he is one, that he was looking for me. He wouldn't find me. That was the point. The ghost doesn't stand in crowds. The ghost dismantles you from a distance and lets you wonder, for the rest of your life, how it happened. It's over, Nina said from the doorway. She'd been on the phone with her bureau contact for the past hour. Federal charges, RICO, money laundering. Human trafficking. They're using the Calloway transfer as one of the counts, but framed as Kovac forcing the arrangement, not you. And the contract? I asked. Destroyed. As far as the federal government is concerned, Serena Calloway was a victim of Kovac's operation, who was rescued by an anonymous benefactor. Nina's mouth curved, very anonymous. I looked at Serena. She was watching the television, her expression unreadable. Kovac was being put into the back of a federal vehicle, his wrists in steel, his empire in ruins. How do you feel? I asked. She was quiet for a long time. Lighter, she said finally, like something I've been carrying just set itself down. I understood, because I felt it too. The photograph story died within the week. Not because we suppressed it. We didn't. Nina had been right. Trying to kill the story would only feed it. Instead, we starved it. No comment, no denial, no dramatic public statement, just silence. And when silence wasn't enough, Lachlan arranged for several far more interesting scandals, involving a state senator and an offshore gambling ring to dominate the news cycle. You're welcome, Lachlan said when he called to check in. The senator thing was real, by the way. I just made sure the timing was convenient. You're terrifying, I told him. I learned from the best. How's Serena? I glanced across the room, where she was curled on the couch reading, the dove-gray blanket around her shoulders, Margot's ocean painting visible through the doorway. She's here. That's not what I asked. It's the answer. Lachlan was quiet, then laughed. The warm, slightly exasperated laugh of a brother who'd watched me suffer for 7 years and was trying not to be too openly delighted that the suffering had an expiration date. You love her, he said. Yes. Have you told her? On my office floor, in the middle of a breakdown, surrounded by the shredded remains of a contract, I tore apart with my bare hands. Silence. That is simultaneously the most romantic and most unhinged thing I've ever heard, Lachlan said. Please tell me you've said it since then. in a less crisis-adjacent setting. I hadn't, because the words had come out in extremis, wrenched from me by fear and grief and the terror of losing her, and I wasn't sure they counted when they'd been extracted under duress. I wanted to say them again. Properly. In the light, with my face dry and my hands steady, looking at her, and meaning it not as a confession torn from a breaking man, but as a statement from a whole one. "I'm working on it," I told Lachlan. "Work faster. She deserves the words, Callum, not the ruins of them." He hung up. And I sat there, watching Serena read, and began planning how to say 3 words properly for the first time in my life. He asked me to go somewhere with him on a Saturday morning. No explanation. Just, "Will you come with me today?" Over breakfast, his voice carrying that particular careful quality it got when he was about to do something that cost him. "Where?" "You'll see. You know I hate surprises." "I know. Will you come anyway?" I looked at him across the table. This man who'd cried on his office floor, torn up a contract, dismantled a criminal empire, and still couldn't ask me to go somewhere without bracing for rejection. "Yes," I said. Brennan drove us to Mount Auburn Cemetery. I recognized the route before we arrived. The Cambridge streets, the iron gates, the quiet that settled over the car like snowfall as we entered the grounds. He was taking me to Margot. Or rather, he was taking himself, and asking me to come with him. We walked from the car in silence. November had stripped the trees to their bones, and the cemetery was gray and gold, and heartbreakingly beautiful in the thin morning light. Our breath made clouds. The grass crunched beneath our shoes. Callum carried white roses. I carried sunflowers. He'd looked at them when I'd appeared at the car with the bouquet, bought from a corner stand on impulse, because I'd known, somehow, where we were going, and sunflowers were the only thing I could think to bring. Something alive. Something that faced the light. He hadn't said anything, just held the car door open with one hand and the roses in the other and waited for me to get in. We found her together. The headstone was the same, clean, maintained, the single word beneath her name that had broken my heart the first time I'd seen it. Beloved. Callum knelt, placed the white roses in the small vase at the base of the stone, stayed there, on his knees, for a long time. I stood a few feet back, giving him space. This was his grief, his ritual. I was a guest here, and I understood the etiquette of sorrow. Sometimes you hold someone through it, and sometimes you stand close enough to catch them if they fall, and far enough to let them feel it alone. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Hi, Margot." The wind moved through the bare branches. I wrapped my coat tighter. "It's been a while. 3 years since I came here. I know that's terrible. But every time I thought about standing here, all I could see was the last time. The funeral, the rain, that box going into the ground with everything I had left inside it." He paused. "I brought someone with me today." He looked back at me. Something in his expression, an invitation, a plea, made me step forward. I knelt beside him. "This is Serena," Callum said, and his voice steadied on my name the way a compass steadies on north. "She's not you. She'll never be you. Her hair's short because she cut it with kitchen scissors at midnight to make sure I'd never look at her and see anyone else. She burns risotto and argues with me in my own office, and visited your grave before I had the courage to bring her here." My throat tightened. "She's strong in ways I didn't think people could be, and she's furious most of the time, which is—" he almost smiled. "It's actually pretty terrifying, but she's also kind and honest, and she makes me want to be something other than a ghost." He reached over and took my hand. His fingers were cold, mine were shaking. "I love her, Margot," he said, "not instead of you, not to replace you. I love her because she's Serena, and Serena is the reason I'm standing here instead of hiding from your name." A tear slipped down my cheek. I didn't wipe it. "I'm always going to love you," he continued, and his voice cracked on the verb. "You were my first, my best, the person who taught me that love was worth the risk. And I failed you. I made a choice that put you in danger, and I will carry that for the rest of my life." He squeezed my hand. "But I'm done letting that weight crush me. You wouldn't have wanted that. You would have wanted me to live, to feel things, to let someone in." A pause. "So I'm letting someone in, and I hope, you'd be glad." The cemetery was silent. Just wind and birds and the vast, quiet patience of the dead. I placed my sunflowers beside his roses. White and gold. Memory and life. Side by side. "Thank you," I whispered to the stone, "for loving him first, for making him someone worth loving." Callum's hand tightened on mine. We knelt there together for a while longer. How long, I don't know. Time moved differently in cemeteries. Slower. More honest. The kind of pace that lets you feel things you'd normally outrun. When we finally stood, Callum looked at the headstone one more time. "Goodbye, Margot," he said. Not with finality. He'd be back, I knew. This wasn't an ending. It was a shift. A reorganization of grief from the center of his life to a place beside it. Still present. Still honored. But no longer the only thing. We walked back to the car. Halfway down the path, his hand found mine again. Not letting go this time. In the car, heading home, I watched the city stream past and tried to find the words. 3 words. Simple. The most basic combination of syllables in the English language. I'd said them to Margot 1,000 times. I'd said them to Serena once, on my office floor, surrounded by the wreckage of a contract and a breakdown. Now I needed to say them clean. Serena sat beside me, her hands still in mine, her face turned toward the window. She'd been quiet since the cemetery, not withdrawn, present, thinking, processing the weight of what we'd just done. "Serena." She turned. Those dark eyes, the freckles, the jaw that was sharper than Margot's, more angular, more defiant even at rest, the short hair that she'd cut in an act of war against a ghost, and that I now couldn't imagine any other way. "I love you," I said. Not wrenched, not extracted, not desperate. Steady, clear, looking at her in the daylight with my face dry and my voice whole. She blinked. "You said that already," she said. "On the floor, during the breakdown." "I know, that one was real, but it was ugly. You deserve it said properly." "What's the proper way to say it?" "Like this, in the car, on a Saturday, after visiting a grave, with your hand in mine and nothing on fire, and no one threatening us, and no contract between us." I raised her hand, pressed my lips to her knuckles. "I love you, not because of your face, not because of who you remind me of, because you're Serena Calloway, and you are the bravest, most difficult, most extraordinary person I have ever known, and I don't want to spend another day without you knowing that I know that." She stared at me. Then her face crumpled. Not delicately, because nothing Serena did was delicate. Her eyes went red, her chin wobbled, and she pressed her free hand over her mouth in a gesture so vulnerable it made my chest ache. "Damn you," she managed through her fingers. "I was doing so well. I made it through the entire cemetery without falling apart. I know, you were magnificent. And now you're making me cry in the back of a car. Sorry. You're not sorry." "I'm not," I admitted. She laughed, wet, broken, beautiful, and leaned across the seat to kiss me. It tasted like salt and cold air, and the particular sweetness of a woman who'd been waiting to hear those words said properly, and hadn't known it until the moment they arrived. "I love you too," she said against my lips. "You impossible, infuriating, emotionally constipated man. I love you." "Emotionally constipated," I repeated. "The most romantic thing about you is that you rehearse speeches to scrambled eggs and cry on office floors and carry a dead woman's painting around like a love letter you can't send. You're the worst communicator I've ever met, and I'm completely, irreversibly in love with you." Brennan, to his eternal credit, kept his eyes on the road. We drove home. The estate rose from the cliff like it always did, stone and glass and the indifferent permanence of old money. But something about it looked different today, Less like a monument, less like a mausoleum. More like a home. We walked inside together. Serena paused in the foyer, the same foyer where she'd arrived weeks ago, delivered by Brennan like cargo, a woman sold to settle a debt she'd never incurred. She'd been smaller then. Not physically, she'd always been 5'7" of backbone and fury. But the way she'd held herself had been contracted, compressed, the posture of someone bracing for impact. Now she stood there, with her shoulders back and her chin up and her hand in mine, and she looked like she belonged. Not because I'd made her belong, because she'd decided to. "What happens now?" she asked, looking up at me. "No contract, no Kovac, no debt. I could leave." "You could. Do you want me to?" I looked at her. Serena, only Serena, always Serena, and the answer was so obvious it nearly made me laugh. "I want you to do whatever makes you whole." She tilted her head. "You make me whole, you impossible man. Then stay." "I'm staying." Not because of a contract, not because of a debt, because of a choice, made freely, made fully, made by a woman who had every reason to walk away and didn't. I pulled her against me, right there in the foyer, and held her the way I should have held her from the beginning, not as a transaction or a possession or a shadow of someone I'd lost, but as the woman I'd found. The woman who'd found me. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked, the ocean breathed, the light shifted. And the ghosts, all of them, mine and hers, the ones we'd carried and the ones we'd laid to rest, were quiet. Finally, blessedly quiet. Epilogue. The Living. Serena Calloway. 1 year later. The painting was almost finished. I'd been working on it for 3 months. A 17th century oil, Dutch, attributed to a student of Vermeer's. Some minor master whose name had been lost to history but whose brushwork was exquisite. Delicate layers of light, built up over decades that had been damaged by water, age, and the particular violence of being stored in a Boston basement for 40 years by a collector who'd valued acquisition over preservation. Restoration was surgery. You peeled back layers of damage to reveal what was underneath. The original intention, the first hand, the beauty that had been there all along beneath the grime and neglect. I was aware of the metaphor. My studio occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in the Fort Point neighborhood. High ceilings, industrial windows, the kind of natural light that made colors sing. Callum had found the space. I'd furnished it. We'd argued for 2 weeks about whether he was allowed to pay for the renovation, and I'd won by pointing out that accepting his money for professional equipment was not the same as being purchased, and if he couldn't see the difference, he needed therapy more than he thought. He'd gotten the therapy too, incidentally. Not because I'd asked. Because one morning, 3 months after Kovac's arrest, he'd found me in the kitchen and said, "I made an appointment with someone. A professional. Someone to talk to about." He gestured vaguely at himself, at the house, at the invisible architecture of grief he'd been living inside. All of it. I'd kissed him so hard he'd spilled his coffee. "That's the bravest thing you've ever done," I'd told him. "I've confronted armed men, Serena. This is braver." He'd gone every week since. Didn't talk about what happened in the sessions. That was his, and I respected the boundary. But I could see the changes. The way his shoulders sat lower. The way he slept through the night more often than not. The way he'd started cooking again. Not just breakfast, but elaborate Sunday dinners that Lachlan attended with wine and commentary, and the specific joy of a brother watching someone come back to life. Callum Reeve was not fixed. People weren't appliances. You didn't fix them, you just created conditions where they could grow. And he was growing, every day. In small, quiet ways that no one else would notice, but that I cataloged with the same precision I'd once used to track his absences. The way he said good morning now, not a note on the counter, but his voice in the kitchen looking at me. The way he touched me, casually, constantly, a hand on my hip as he passed, a kiss to my temple when he brought coffee, the specific weight of his arm across my waist at 3 a.m. when he pulled me closer in his sleep. The way he said my name, Still with that particular gravity, still like it cost him something. But now it cost him joy instead of pain. The studio door opened at 4 in the afternoon, right on schedule. Callum appeared with 2 cups from the coffee shop 3 blocks over, the one with the barista who was terrified of him and made his drinks with the desperate precision of someone defusing a bomb. "You're here," I said, not looking up from the painting. "I'm always here. At 4 o'clock, every day. Like a very large, very intimidating alarm clock. You forget to eat." "I ate lunch." "Coffee is not lunch, Serena." I looked up at him. Dark blonde hair, pale eyes, that jaw that could have been carved from the same stone as Margot's headstone. He was wearing a charcoal sweater rolled to his elbows, and an expression that was trying very hard to be stern and failing, because his eyes were doing the soft thing they did when he watched me work. I loved this man. The thought arrived the way it always did, not as a revelation anymore, but as a fact, steady, structural, the foundation beneath everything else. "Have dinner with me tonight," he said. "We have dinner every night. Not at home, out. The restaurant on the waterfront. Our place. A small Italian trattoria with red-checked tablecloths, and a chef who'd immigrated from Naples and made pasta that could make you weep. We'd found it by accident 6 months ago, during one of our rare excursions into the city as a couple. Callum had eaten 3 plates of cacio e pepe and told me, with absolute sincerity, that it was the best thing he'd tasted since his grandmother's cooking. The chef had cried. Callum had been baffled. I'd loved him so fiercely in that moment that my chest ached. "Dinner?" I agreed, "but I'm not changing out of these clothes." He looked at my paint-stained jeans, my oversized flannel, the smudge of cadmium yellow on my cheek. "You're perfect," he said. "You're biased." "Completely. 7 o'clock. Brennan will pick you up." He kissed me, quick, warm, the kind of kiss that said, "I'll see you soon, and I'm counting the hours," and left. I turned back to my painting. Smiled. Kept working. Lachlan called at 5. "What are you wearing tonight?" he asked without preamble. "Paint-stained jeans and a flannel. Why?" "Of course you are." He sighed. The theatrical sigh of a man who had opinions about fashion and no one who listened to them. "Just maybe brush your hair? Put on the earrings I sent you for your birthday? Look slightly less like you've been wrestling with a canvas for 9 hours? Why does it matter what I wear to dinner?" Silence. "Lachlan, I've said too much. Forget I called. Enjoy your evening. Goodbye." He hung up. I stared at my phone. Then I looked at my paint-stained hands, my wrecked clothes, and thought about why Callum had asked me to dinner at our restaurant, with an expression that was doing its very best to look casual and not quite succeeding. Oh. I changed my clothes. Brennan picked me up at 7 in the black SUV, his face arranged in its usual impassive mask, though I caught a flicker of something when he saw me. The dark green dress from the gala, the earrings from Lachlan, my short hair actually styled for once. "You look nice, Miss Calloway," he said. "You know something," I accused. "I know many things. Very few of them are my business to share." The restaurant was warm and loud and smelled like garlic and olive oil and the specific happiness of people eating well. Callum was already seated at our usual table, the one in the corner, with a view of the harbor. He stood when he saw me, and the look on his face. I'd seen Callum Reeve in many states, cold and controlled, grief-wrecked, furious, tender, asleep at 3 in the morning with his face pressed against my shoulder, looking younger than his years and less like a man who'd built an empire from sorrow. But I'd never seen him nervous. He was nervous. Callum Reeve, the ghost, the man who'd stared down Russian arms dealers and dismantled criminal organizations without raising his pulse, was nervous about dinner. "Hi," I said, sitting down. "Hi." He was doing the thing with his hands, the thumb across knuckles motion that meant he was processing something difficult. "You changed." Lachlan called. "I'm going to kill my brother." "No, you're not." He was trying to help. I reached across the table and covered his hands with mine. "You're shaking." "I'm not." "Your hands are vibrating like a tuning fork against the tablecloth." "Just like they did at the gala." He exhaled, looked at me, and the nervousness in his expression shifted into something else, something resolute. The face of a man who'd made a decision and was going to follow through, even if it terrified him. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his jacket and produced a small box. My heart stopped, then restarted at approximately twice its normal speed. "Callum, it's not what you think." He opened the box. Inside was a key. Small, brass, old-fashioned. The kind of key that opened doors in houses built before locks became electronic and entrances became frictionless. "The East Wing," I said. He nodded. The East Wing. The one room I'd never been allowed to enter. The rule from my first day: you may go anywhere except the East Wing. I'd respected the boundary. Hadn't even tried the door after the first week. It was his space, his grief, his locked room, and I'd understood that some doors needed to stay closed until the person behind them was ready to open them. "Go home," Callum said. "Use the key. I'll follow." "You're not coming with me?" "I want you to see it alone first, without me watching, without my reaction, influencing yours." He pressed the key into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "Then, when I get home, you can tell me what you think." "Callum, what's in the East Wing?" "Everything," he said. "Go." Brennan drove me home. I stood in the hallway outside the East Wing door, key in hand, heart in my throat. The lock turned smoothly. I pushed the door open and forgot how to breathe. The room had been transformed. Not recently. This had taken months. The dark furniture was gone. The heavy curtains were gone. The room was flooded with light from new skylights cut into the ceiling. And the walls had been painted the warm white of gallery spaces. And every surface was alive. Photographs. One entire wall, floor to ceiling, covered in photographs. Me. Not posed, not formal. Candid shots, dozens of them, captured in moments I hadn't known were being documented. Me in the kitchen, laughing at something Mrs. Hale said, flour on my hands. Me in the conservatory, bent over a sketchbook, hair falling across my face. Me at my studio, standing at the easel, the Dutch painting half restored behind me, my expression so focused it looked like prayer. Me on the cliff path, walking into the wind, coat pulled tight, the ocean behind me. Me asleep, on the couch, the dove-gray blanket around my shoulders. Margot's ocean painting visible through the doorway. My face was soft in sleep, unguarded, and the photograph had been taken from the doorway. Close enough to see, far enough to let me rest. Every photograph was a moment Callum had seen and wanted to keep. Not my face, my life. And there, at the center of the wall, surrounded by photographs of me, was a single image that was not. Margot. The same photograph from the poetry book. Laughing, hand raised, alive. But it wasn't alone anymore. It wasn't hidden in a drawer or propped on a nightstand in a dark room. It was here, in the light, surrounded by evidence of the life Callum had built after losing her. And beneath it, on a small brass plaque, in letters I recognized as his handwriting translated into metal. She taught me how to love. You taught me how to live. I sat on the floor. Not because my legs gave out, though they nearly did. Because this room, this wall, this impossible gesture deserved to be received from a place of humility. From the ground up. I cried, not delicately, not gracefully. The big, messy, full-body kind that shook my shoulders and made my nose run, and probably ruined the mascara I'd put on because Lachlan had told me to brush my hair. I cried for the woman in the photograph who'd loved a difficult man and died for it. I cried for the man who'd spent 7 years punishing himself for surviving. I cried for the girl I'd been, the one in the warehouse, signing a contract, becoming a transaction, and for the woman I'd become. And I cried because someone had finally seen me. Not the face. Me. I heard his footsteps before I heard his voice. Slow, deliberate. The same measured cadence I'd learned to recognize in the early days, when his footsteps outside my door were the only evidence he existed. He stopped in the doorway. I looked up at him from the floor, tear-streaked, wrecked, my expensive dress crumpled, my careful hair destroyed. "You," I said, and my voice was a ruin, "are the most impossibly romantic man who has ever lived, and you expressed it by secretly photographing me for months, like a beautiful, emotionally damaged stalker." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he crossed the room, knelt in front of me, and pulled a second box from his pocket. This one was smaller. Velvet. Not a key. "Marry me," he said. Not a question. Not quite. A statement that carried a question inside it, the way his voice always carried more than the words suggested. Layers of meaning compressed into simple syllables, the verbal equivalent of his gifts, his gestures, his particular way of expressing what he felt by showing rather than telling. "Not because of a contract," he continued, "not because of a debt, not because of a face or a ghost, or any of the terrible reasons that brought you to me. Because I can't imagine a single day without you. Because you burned my risotto and cut your hair and visited a grave and made me human again. Because you're the bravest person I've ever known, and I'm tired of pretending I could survive without you." He opened the box. The ring was simple. Platinum band, single stone, not a diamond. An emerald. Green as the dress I'd chosen to replace the black. Green as the fern he'd left on my windowsill. Green as the first color that had entered this house after years of gray. I looked at the ring. At him. At the wall of photographs. My life, seen through his eyes, preserved in light. At Margot's face, smiling from the center of it all, surrounded by evidence that her death had not been the end of the story. "Yes," I said. He exhaled, a sound I'd heard before, in the car after the gala, on the office floor, in the cemetery. The sound of Callum Reeve setting down something he'd been carrying for too long. "But I'm keeping my name," I added. He slid the ring onto my finger. "Wouldn't expect anything else." I pulled him down to me and kissed him, on the floor, in the East Wing, surrounded by photographs and ghosts and the particular devastating light of a room that had once been a shrine and was now a beginning. Later, much later, after we'd moved from the floor to the couch to the kitchen, where he made me eggs at midnight because he said the restaurant dinner didn't count since I'd left before the main course, we stood on the cliff path. The ocean was black and silver beneath a full moon. The house glowed behind us. The wind was cold, and I was wearing his jacket over my dress, and his arm was around my waist, and the emerald on my finger caught the moonlight the way the ring in the jeweler's box never could. "Do you ever think about it?" I asked. "The warehouse, the contract, the way we started?" "Every day," he said. "Regrets?" He was quiet. Considering. Callum never answered quickly when the question mattered. "I regret how I found you," he said finally. "I regret the contract, the transaction. The months I kept you at a distance because I was too afraid to admit what I felt. But I don't regret you, not for a second, not for a breath." He pulled me closer. "You taught me that grief doesn't have to be the whole story, that there's room for something else, something alive." I leaned into him, felt his heartbeat through the layers of fabric, steady now, no longer the erratic percussion of a man fighting his own feelings. Steady. Like a man who'd finally stopped running. "Serena," he said. Just my name. The way he'd said it outside my door in the dark, all those months ago, when it was the only thing he'd allow himself. But now, it wasn't whispered through wood. It was spoken into the open air, under the stars, against my hair, with his arms around me and no barrier between us. My name. Not a ghost's. Mine. "I'm here," I said. The ocean breathed. The ghosts were quiet. The living had won. The end.